Rasmus lunged, swinging the wooden sword at Vidal's head, but Vidal casually tilted his body to the side, dodging with ease.
No tension, no effort.
It had been nearly a year of relentless training, yet Rasmus had never landed a single blow. Frustrated, he tapped into the faint aura in his core, reinforcing his limbs even though he knew he'd pay the price in exhaustion later. "You're improving," Vidal commented coolly, knocking the blade away with the back of his hand just before it reached his face. "Your stance is tighter, your swings faster."
But still.
With a flick of his wrist, he slapped Rasmus's hand. The wooden sword clattered to the ground. "Your grip's too tight, your wrist is stiff, and you're holding it too far up the handle." Before Rasmus could react, Vidal's fist slammed into his gut, sending him stumbling backward and nearly to his knees. Panting, Rasmus hunched over, hands braced on his thighs, eyes locked on the grass beneath him. The pain was sharp, but sharper still was the bitter taste of inadequacy. He once believed himself to be Earth's best mercenary, but here in Neva, he was nothing but a struggling student. "You should feel proud," Vidal said, holding up his hand and showing the minuscule space between his fingers, barely enough for an ant to slip through. "That's how much I had to increase my power to keep up. You're progressing faster than I expected. Must be the royal blood in your veins." Rasmus brushed hair out of his face, then noticed a rabbit in the distance. Without thinking, he drew his knife and hurled it, clean strike, right through the skull. He retrieved it silently, staring at the lifeless creature in his grasp. "I'm no different from this rabbit," he thought. Quick.
Precise.
But powerless before a true predator. Right, my bloodline, he muttered, gripping the rabbit tighter. He had learned how much weight bloodlines carried in Neva. Royal families weren't just figureheads, they were born with greater affinity for mana and carried more primal force than commoners. Legends said the gods themselves had blessed their ancestors. "So that's why Lenin wants me at the academy," Rasmus said, sitting near the fire and beginning to skin the rabbit. "Likely," Vidal replied. "Royal blood means obligation. You're the only exiled noble in Neva with no current allegiance. Teaching is as close to service as you can offer." Rasmus didn't respond immediately. He stared into the flames as the chill wind brushed against his skin, the sun setting behind the horizon. From his memories, and those of the former Rasmus, he recalled the tangled family tree that connected him to the royal line of the Rufinus kingdom. They shared the same great-great-grandfather. Meanwhile, in the Chancellor's office, Chancellor Lenin sat behind her grand oak desk, brows furrowed as she studied a stack of student profiles. Opposite her sat Professors Arnoldi and Julian. The documents in her hands had held her gaze for over 5 minutes. 6 files, each bearing a name heavy with power and legacy. "We've spent months on this," she finally said, setting the papers down. "And we still don't know which classes would challenge them." "With all due respect, Chancellor," Arnoldi said cautiously, "these students have already received top-tier education long before coming to Gratlin Academy. Their tutors were our own finest graduates. Honestly, we have little left to offer." Lenin's fingers brushed over the 6 profiles, 6 anomalies. Maximilian Wyverncrest, heir to the northern ducal house that crushed a tyrant 4 centuries ago. Rumored to be the strongest warrior of his generation, already known as the Northern Star. Alexander Ravenshroud, a prodigy whose family, though not noble, held lands rivaling empires. His father had been granted the title Prince of Neva by royal decree, power matched only by few. Aurelia Angelus, born of the Angelus family, keepers of the holy nation and wielders of divine authority across all corners of Neva. Though not royalty, they were revered as saints. Monica Sancticus, her lineage akin to Aurelia's. As a saint of the north, she represented the Sancticus enclave, which held unmatched influence in the largest region of Neva. Valaria Shenvale, son of the richest man in the world. The Ashenvale family's wealth could shake kingdoms, their gold flowing like rivers no law could fully dam. And lastly, Isidore Suncrown, the crown prince of the Sun Empire, the most dominant force since the Great Era. His family's empire, centered in central Neva, was the cornerstone of peace and stability across the world. Lenin exhaled deeply. Something like this happened 400 years ago. That group, no one could control them, and they nearly turned the world on its head, she said grimly. The Council of Neva is already calling this the Second Great Era. Across the table, Julian tapped his fingers thoughtfully. Magic, academics, strength. These students excel in all. What can we possibly teach them that they haven't already mastered? Lenin stood and walked to the window, staring at the distant peaks. That's why I brought him, she said. Instructor Blackheart has lived through 10 years of hell. No magic. No allies. Just grit and pain. He clawed his way from the abyss and rebuilt himself. That's something no noble child has faced.
Arnoldi bristled.
With respect, Chancellor. You're letting a man barely 6 years older than them guide this generation? He lacks experience. He lacks prestige, Lenin corrected sharply.
Not experience.
That boy taught mana theory to children in Hergel village.
And he succeeded.
Would you rather learn from a pampered prince or a survivor who mastered life the hard way? Arnoldi clenched his jaw, but remained silent. Julian said nothing either. I'll bear full responsibility for what's to come, Lenin said firmly. She activated a magical sigil in her iris and turned her gaze to the distant mountain. There, she watched Rasmus Blackheart laugh beside Vidal as they roasted rabbit over the fire. My instincts have never failed me. Arnoldi bowed stiffly and left the office, his fists clenched and his expression dark. Rasmus had trained relentlessly with Vidal, pushing himself day after day in the quiet wilderness before the term began. He wanted to eliminate every flaw, forge himself into the perfect version of a human being, stronger, faster, and beyond reproach. But no matter how hard he trained, something held him back. He had hit a wall, the limit of his primal force.
This is it.
I've been waiting to see your fury. Vidal's grin widened as he watched Rasmus's aura flare, coating his limbs and wooden blade. Rasmus stomped forward, the ground trembling beneath his foot. He charged, focusing aura at the tip of his blade. As he swung, animals scattered and birds burst from trees, sensing the overwhelming pressure. But Vidal caught the strike with his bare hand, and crushed the sword like dry bark. The aura vanished in an instant. Before Rasmus could react, his punch was intercepted. Fist met palm, and the resulting shockwave cracked the trunks of trees. Several collapsed around them like snapped twigs. That tickled, Vidal scoffed before slamming his forehead into Rasmus's. Dazed, Rasmus nearly lost consciousness, until a strong grip seized his face and slammed him into the ground. Pain bloomed across his skull. His scream echoed through the forest before everything went dark. He awoke to the hoot of an owl. His head pounded like war drums. He groaned, blood seeping from his mouth, and vomited red onto the forest floor. Oddly, it cleared his head a bit. Open up, Vidal said, offering a wooden cup filled with something dark and pungent.
It'll help.
The liquid was thick, bitter, and reeked of herbs and rot, but Rasmus choked it down. Relief came like a tide. He wiped his mouth and tried to sit up. I don't have time to rest, he muttered, forcing his body to move. You've hit a wall, Vidal said calmly. Your body isn't built for more. It's not meant for a warrior of this world. You're wasting your effort. That's bullshit, Rasmus growled, massaging his temple. There's a method in Eastern Neva.
A way to break through that wall.
I've heard of it. Oh sure, the technique only a few are chosen to learn.
Vidal laughed.
Face it, you're just a nobody. Rasmus glanced up, unshaken. Maybe now. But not forever. He closed his eyes, accepting that rest was all he could do for now. Tomorrow, the academy awaited. Chapter: Arrival of Legends. At dawn, Rasmus returned to the academy. The first thing he noticed was a large suitcase in his quarters, along with a sealed envelope atop the table. He opened it, an assignment letter. He blinked. He'd been assigned to teach 6 students. Not in the magic hall, but in the main building. Strange. Inside the suitcase was his new instructor's attire and a gleaming badge. Beneath it, a thick document detailed the students he would be teaching. He didn't even have time to finish reading when Vidal stood at the door. I'll let you be then, he said, preparing to leave. You really can't resist making an exit line, huh? Rasmus smirked. There are maids awaiting my arrival. Vidal flashed a grin and closed the door behind him. Not long after, the rumble of noise outside drew Rasmus to the window. Dozens, no hundreds, of blimps filled the skies. The academy grounds buzzed with activity. It was the most opulent arrival he had ever seen. He stepped outside and walked past the main building, only to bump into Chancellor Lenin. Good morning, Instructor Blackheart, she greeted, noting his more muscular build. Come. Let's go meet them. Yes, Chancellor. They rode a carriage toward the airfield, skies filled with shadows of massive airborne ships. I didn't expect so many blimps, Rasmus said, watching the spectacle through the window. They're only for a few students, Lenin replied with amusement. His brow furrowed. Wait, those crests don't tell me. Yes, Lenin confirmed. Those are your students. Heirs of Neva's most powerful families. This era has been named the Second Great Era for a reason. To her surprise, Rasmus didn't flinch. He even smiled. He wasn't intimidated. That confirmed it, he was the right choice. At the airfield, Rasmus saw why the blimps were needed. Servants, knights, horses, luggage, even carriages were being unloaded. It looked less like a student welcome and more like a royal procession. Those with the wyvern crests belong to the wyvern crest family, Lennon pointed out. The only ones who dare land beside them are the Sancticus family. She nodded toward blimps marked by a black crown. Rasmus turned his head. On the other side were blimps with a white and gold mitre hat.
Angelus.
And beside them, Lennon added, the Sun Crown royal family. See the crown-shaped sun. He noted the clear tension between the two sides. Armed guards stood ready. Even their arrivals were statements of power. There, Lennon said, pointing to another area. The Ashenvale family. See the pot of gold? They're neutral, wise of them to land separately.
Rasmus nodded.
But one is missing, he said, scanning the sky. Where's the Raven Shroud family?
Lennon turned to him, puzzled. You don't know?
He's been here for over a month. I assumed you'd already met him, perhaps in the park before you left for training. Rasmus's eyes widened. That boy? I suppose you didn't realize it at the time, Lennon chuckled. Anyway, you may return if you wish. I have greetings to attend. She walked toward Professors Arnoldi and Julian, leaving Rasmus to observe the chaotic, regal flood of power that would soon become his students.
And he couldn't help but smile again.
Let the new era begin.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
A young muscular man had an intense and determined expression, with dark, slicked-back hair. His attire was a long dark coat adorned with intricate details, a high collar, and a fur-like cape, suggesting a position of power or nobility. The young man wore gloves and had a brooch on his chest, the same symbol as the Wyverncrest family. Maximilian Wyverncrest. Rasmus crossed his arms as he watched Maximilian walk toward the blimp that belonged to the Sancticus family. Maximilian stood in front of the stairs, waiting for someone inside the blimp. He didn't say a word and just stood there while the knights of the Sancticus nation paid their respects to him. A young woman had long dark hair and a serene yet intense expression. Her attire was dark and intricately detailed, with a high collar and elaborate patterns, suggesting high status and authority. She wore a dark, ornate crown with sharp, elegant points, further emphasizing her status as a prominent figure in the north. The young woman walked down the stairs and Maximilian slowly bowed his head a bit to respect her status. They both walked side by side with knights from both families following them. You're going to be fine with her around? Monica Sancticus is going to be a saint which should be holding divine power. Rasmus glanced at Videl, who was busy staring at the beautiful maids. Do you think I'm a lowly demon who's born from hellfire? I'm the devil who was created by God's divine flame. Divine power is like a breeze of chill wind to me, Videl answered as he found the maids he wanted to sleep with. But her divinity is quite lacking compared to that one over there who seems to be overwhelmed by divinity. Rasmus didn't understand much about divinity, but knowing something like that did exist made him wary of it. He then looked at the woman that Videl mentioned earlier, and the woman had just come out of the blimp. A young woman with platinum blonde hair that cascaded over her shoulders, with a few strands delicately braided at the sides. Her expression was calm yet serious, with a hint of softness in her gaze. She was dressed in a light, flowing gown with intricate lace-up details along the neckline and sleeves, giving her an elegant and noble appearance. The gown's fabric had a subtle sheen, emphasizing her refined and dignified aura. The crown prince is a lot more humble than I thought, Videl said as he crossed his arms. Unlike Maximilian, who seemed to show dominance over anyone around him. Rasmus looked at the strikingly beautiful young man with long light blonde hair tied back in a ponytail. He had piercing blue eyes that conveyed a sense of depth and intensity. His expression was calm and serious, adding to his air of mystery and elegance. He was dressed in a high-collared, white shirt with intricate embroidery, fastened with a brooch. Rasmus and Videl had the same thoughts, whereas Isidore and Aurelia seemed to wear similar attire. Isidore offered his hand to Aurelius before she took the last step off the stairs. Aurelius held Isidore's hand and walked together as they wrapped their arms together. It appears they're in a very good relationship. Rasmus observed the difference between the two saints and their relationship with Maximilian and Isidore. Both men showed their respect in a different way. This is very interesting, he added with a bit of a smile on his face. And here goes the richest man in the whole Neva world. Valeria Shenvale. Videl looked at the luxurious blimp made of gold with gems that decorated the body. Playing safe by going out last.
Smart kid, he chuckled.
A tanned young man with black curly hair wearing a high-quality black cotton poet shirt, a brown vest, with a white cape that covered the right side of his body. He looked at the powerful figures in front of him and decided to walk in the middle of the airfield, ahead of them to greet Lenin first. Valery put his right hand on his chest since it was how the Eastern greeted someone with the utmost respect. Lenin smiled and did the same thing as she welcomed him into the academy. The conversation didn't take long and Valery excused himself as his servants carried his belongings behind him. He waited for his carriage to be ready, but then a carriage came which wasn't his carriage. He smiled as he rested his hands on his waist because he knew who came to see him. Long time no see, Valery. Alexander came out of the carriage with a big smile on his face.
Alex, my brother.
I'm glad to see you again. Valery offered a hug to Alexander. Rasmus could see the dynamics between the students that he was going to teach. He could see the big picture of their alliances with each other. Maximilian and Monica had a good relationship since both families were from the north. Aurelius, as the daughter of the current saint, was in a close relationship with Isidore. Lastly, Alexander and Valery seemed to have a great relationship as both families held power from their own efforts. The North has always separated themselves from the rest of the world, which explains the tension between them and the rest. But they have a neutral relationship with the Shenvale and Ravenshroud for political and economic matters, Rasmus said after he observed the students. It's also the same for the Angelus and the Suncrown. You believe they have a neutral relationship with Angelus and Suncrown? I don't see a reason why they should stay neutral since the North can't offer more than what the rest of Neva can, especially with the Suncrown family. Videl looked at Rasmus with curiosity. The East, West, South and Central Neva have so many kings and emperors. If they decided to show any favorable toward a few families, they will lose more than they gain, Rasmus answered. It's not about what they can get, it's about not making unwanted enemies. Unlike the North, who's united and stays close to each other like one big family, the rest are competing to become the strongest. So, even if the North can't offer more than the rest, it won't affect these two families at all, Rasmus explained and kept observing the students. On the other hand, if either the Ravenshroud family or the Ashenvale family decided to get closer to the North, the rest of the world would antagonize them, Rasmus pointed out. They have more than enough of everything. Playing safe and keeping a stable relationship with everyone is the best for them. Rasmus decided to leave after he had seen enough of the students. He didn't want to spoil the fun by observing them too much. He wanted to greet them personally in class since they were soon to become his students. Alexander offered Valery to go into the academy with his carriage. Valery had no reason to decline and went inside with Alexander. They were talking about the business that both families partake in. The conversation was heavy and they were sharing their thoughts about the business until Alexander asked the coachman to stop the carriage. "What are you doing?" Valery furrowed as he watched Alexander leave the carriage hurriedly. Valery was confused because Alexander didn't say anything. He looked out the window and saw Alexander talking with a man in a red suit. Seeing how Alexander spoke with the man in excitement made him curious. "I understand what you meant back then. The book that you suggested opened my eyes," Alexander said as he looked at Rasmus. "Do you have any other recommendations?" "Read the book for the second time first. You'll see how beautiful that book is," Rasmus said. "Once you really understand the beauty of that book, come and find me," he added as he walked away.
What's your name?
"Where can I find you?" Alexander watched Rasmus walk away. "We'll meet again very soon," Rasmus answered. Alexander stood there and watched Rasmus leave with Videl beside him. "White hair," Valery said as soon as he walked out of the carriage. "Are you sure you want to be around that guy?" He looked at Alexander with his eyes narrowed. "That's exactly why I want to talk to him," Alexander responded as he rested his hands on his waist. "The prejudice about white hair is getting old." The day of the opening ceremony of the new term came. Students were walking into the hall on the east side of the academy where there were only 50 new students. Since the academy only accepted a selected few, the number of students was smaller than other academies. The academy was similar to a college where they had to study for the next 4 years. Rasmus watched the second year and up to the fourth year students entered the academy. He could see in their eyes that none of them had something special in their eyes. What a letdown. Rasmus sighed as he walked to the academy hall. Almost every student had an amazing background because of their families. A few of them were invited just like Rasmus because of their amazing talents. Nobles or commoners could enroll there as long as they met the requirements. In this year, there were 5 commoners because of their outstanding magic other than Alexander and Valery. Rasmus was sitting on the right side of the hall with the other staff who were on the same rank as him and below. The left side was for the senior professors and below. The ones that sat on the stage behind the podium were for department chairs and above. Rasmus paid attention to the students and how they all behaved like proper adults. There were a total of 200 students from the first year up to the fourth year. Welcome to the Gratlin Academy, and congratulations to all of you who passed the test against millions of geniuses who wish to enroll in this academy. You have proved that you're the best in your generation, Lennon said as she stood on the podium. But that's not something you should be proud of. There's nothing for you to be proud of by enrolling in this academy. Lennon paused to look at each of the students. You can be proud once you show that you're the best compared to everyone in this hall, including all the staff that work here, she continued. Being someone that the world can't replace is what you need to achieve. We are here to assist you to be that someone, and status doesn't matter in this academy. You're all equal until proven that you're not, Lennon said with a serious expression. Compete and become the one on the top. Everyone gave a standing ovation to Lennon, and the introduction was short because there was nothing else that needed to be said. All the students left the hall and went to the notice board to check which class they were assigned to. Everyone was assigned to their proper classes, which they excelled in. How are you feeling, Instructor Blackheart? Lennon approached Rasmus with a gentle smile. Curious, Rasmus answered calmly as he watched the students surround the notice board. I want to see what kind of conflicts they will present me within the classroom. Lennon chuckled with a smile and her head lowered. It appears I'm worried for nothing. I'll wait for the results, Instructor. Lennon left the hall to teach the selected fourth-year students. Those selected students were the top 10 students of the year, which made them the brightest people of the future. Rasmus observed the crowd silently. The moment the students saw Maximilian and Monica, they all moved away and let them look at the notice board first. But the situation worsened when Isidore and Aurelia also came from the other side. Maximilian and Isidore stared at each other with stoic expressions while Monica and Aurelia stared at each other with despise. Go ahead, Isidore smiled gently at Maximilian. Maximilian scoffed and did exactly what Isidore said. Isidore kept smiling and didn't expect the Northern Star didn't even show any courtesy or respect toward him. The other students murmured at the situation, and it was something that they wouldn't be able to witness their whole lives. Maximilian and Monica furrowed, surprised by what they saw. They looked at each other and left without saying anything. Isidore and Aurelia were confused by their reactions, so they went to look at which class they were assigned to. They both had a similar reaction to Maximilian and Monica. They never thought they were in the same class as those two. Isidore realized that it was on purpose by the academy, so he decided to look for Lennon to ask about the decision she made. On the other hand, Aurelia stayed there and she looked irritated by the fact that she had to be in the same class as Monica.
Your Holiness.
Alexander bowed his head. Aurelia turned around and saw Alexander standing behind her with Valerie beside him. She gently smiled at them as she moved away and decided to leave, letting the other students look at the board. This is quite the problem, Valerie said after he found his name on the list.
Indeed.
Alexander nodded his head repeatedly and couldn't believe it as well. They both went to the main building because that was where the class was at. They found Aurelia walking ahead of them, and they looked at each other thinking if they should accompany her or not. In the end, they didn't dare to do so and waited until Aurelia entered the class first. When it was their time to enter, they didn't expect that Maximilian and Monica were already in the classroom. The classroom was too big for 6 students, and seeing how Maximilian and Monica had separated their tables from the rest was enough to say that they didn't plan to interact with anyone. Alexander and Valerie grabbed their tables and put them in the center, while Aurelia used her magic to move the table. There was nothing but silence after that, and it was unnerving for both Alexander and Valerie. Isidore came in, and he was taken aback by the positioning of his classmates. He immediately grabbed his table and put it next to Aurelia since it was the only place for him. This is worse than I expected. Alexander glanced at both sides. Alexander grabbed 2 books from his bag and offered one to Valerie so they didn't have to feel awkward about it. When they both were about to read, someone entered the room, and it was Rasmus who surprised Alexander. Everyone's eyes were filled with questions, wanting to know who he was and his identity. His white hair was like a brand, an ominous one at that. Rasmus stood in front of his desk and he could see the surprised expression in their eyes. Not because of how young he was but because of his white hair that was easy to recognize. May I ask who you are? Isidore narrowed his eyes, staring straight into Rasmus's eyes. My name is Rasmus. Rasmus paused to sit on top of the desk. Rasmus Blackheart, he continued. Aurelia, Maximilian, and Monica had the same reaction. They all closed their eyes and tried to keep a straight face to hide their disgust. Alexander knew about the white hair that was rare in Neva, but he never thought Rasmus was a Blackheart. If you have any problem with that, say it, and I would love to hear it, Rasmus said as he looked at each one of them. There was nothing but silence. Everyone pretended that he didn't exist.
Nothing?
So I'm teaching a bunch of shy students, or perhaps cowards who are too afraid to speak up? Rasmus asked with his eyebrows raised. It's no wonder that your whole family was beheaded. Their blood runs in you as well, it seems. Not knowing your place, Maximilian answered as he stared into Rasmus's eyes. That might be true, and killing all of you here would give me an opportunity for revenge, Rasmus responded with a cold gaze pointed at Maximilian. Maximilian stood up and unsheathed his dagger that was hidden inside his fur cape.
Ah, the Northern Star.
The muscle head that knows nothing but violence, Rasmus scoffed as he shook his head. I wonder what the North would think that a simple provocation was enough to make you hurt an instructor in the academy. Trust me, they would be careless and they would understand after they heard about what you said, Maximilian responded and tightened his grip.
Really?
The rest of Neva have been thinking of expanding their territory. I believe they can use this as a reason to invade the North. A savage that hurt an instructor in front of the Crown Prince and the future saint? Proving that the North is truly filled with savages, Rasmus raised his eyebrows and stared at Maximilian. Maximilian thought about it for a moment and finally, Monica grabbed the dagger from his hand. You're an instructor, and I hope you understand that we can easily report you to the Chancellor for your words, Monica calmly said as she stared at Rasmus coldly. That's what I want to hear, Rasmus smiled as he clapped his hand in excitement, startling everyone. Rather than using violence that raises conflicts, simply using authority to solve the problem. A solution that strikes right into the root. Everyone furrowed and looked confused by Rasmus's words. They looked at him weirdly and realized something was wrong with him. You're all the most educated people in the whole Neva. Do you want those professors to teach you something that you already know? Read a book that you have read dozens of times. Rasmus asked as he stood in the center of the classroom. This is why I'm here. I'm going to make you the most powerful people in the world that nobody dares to mess around with you even without your titles, he explained with a smirk and looked at each one of them. Rasmus slowly took a few steps back and looked at Maximilian, who still couldn't accept the insult. He raised his eyebrows, challenging him to see if he would do another stupid thing. Maximilian sat down and calmed himself down as Monica gave the dagger back to him. I'm giving you a chance to leave this classroom, Rasmus said as he leaned his butt against his desk with his arms crossed. You'll regret leaving this class because you will learn nothing. You graduate, makes your parents proud, but you'll taste bitterness from gaining nothing by wasting your time here for 4 years. And what exactly you're going to teach us? Alexander asked as he tilted his head, leaning his back on the chair. To rule the world, Rasmus answered as he raised his eyebrows. Valerie couldn't stop his chuckle, but he was the only one who did it while the others were still confused. If you find it funny, then let me ask you something. Rasmus walked around his desk and sat in his chair. Who are you, other than what your family have provided for you? He showed his serious expression. Everyone took their time to think. Even Maximilian couldn't say that he was a great warrior because he was taught by a master who was his own father. I think that's a stupid question to begin with. Are you saying that our privileges are our flaws? There were a lot of powerful nobles who fell because they couldn't use their privileges properly. Although we all grew up because of what our family had provided, we made good use of them and did not waste it, Valerie answered as he sat straight. Of course not, but do you think it will last forever? Rasmus rested his cheek on his fist. It won't, but we are raised and taught to handle that kind of situation to prevent and even bring back what was lost, Isidore answered with confidence. You're not the man who created the Suncrown Empire and don't even think that you're as great as him. What you're taught is to maintain what you have, not to rebuild the empire that you have lost, Rasmus responded. Do all of you believe that you can rebuild what you have with your own hands? He asked all of them. So let me ask you once again. What are you without them? Rasmus crossed his legs and stared at them. Everyone still couldn't give an answer and started to rethink who they actually were. They started to question whether they were born to thrive or to follow the path of their predecessors. Nothing is certain. Even on a sunny day, rain can fall, Rasmus said. Then what about this? What makes you who you are right now? Rasmus asked as he tapped his forefinger on the desk. Our privileges? Alexander asked. No, it's not that grand. Something far smaller than what you think, and you became who you are because of it, Rasmus shook his head. It's the most important thing for someone to achieve greatness. Everyone looked at each other, and it was the first time everyone looked at each other without any ill feelings but curiosity about each other's answers and thoughts. Hard work. Maximilian furrowed. That's correct, but hard work means nothing without this thing, Rasmus smiled as he shook his head. Fortune or luck? Monica asked and kept her stoic and cold expression. Close, but that's not it either. You're all here and have a high status isn't because of fortune or luck. Rasmus slowly shook his head. What about you, Aurelius? I don't know, Aurelius shook her head. Rasmus nodded up as he looked at Alexander and Valerie, but they both shook their heads. It's simple and yet the most important thing. Rasmus stood up as he rested his hands on the desk.
Recognition, he smiled.
Everyone looked so confused because they didn't think recognition was the main reason that made them who they were. You don't believe me? Rasmus raised his eyebrows. A king without his people, what is he? A merchant without recognition, would they become a great merchant? A saint without their followers, would people believe that they're a saint? A great leader without recognition could be called a great leader. Without those around you, what you have achieved means nothing. With that being said, what's important when you want to be the greatest is recognition.
You want to be humble?
That's your choice, but don't be jealous of those who achieve so little but are recognized by many. But of course, who wants to be humble when you know you're different from them? Don't you want them to see how great you are and not because of the shadow of your parents or predecessor? So what do you learn from this? Rasmus asked. The public opinion about you, and supported by your hard work and ability, Aurelius answered. That's correct. All of you here already got that, but that recognition isn't directed toward you but to your parents, Rasmus responded as he nodded. With that being said, you need to shift their perspective and prove your worth. Everyone went silent and thought about it thoroughly. They didn't realize the simplest thing about recognition and they had been taking it for granted. Professor, can I ask something? Monica raised her hand and looked at Rasmus. I'm not a professor, I'm just an instructor. You can call me by my name, and not my family name, Rasmus said as he went back to his desk. Also, ask away. You said that you wanted to teach us to rule the world. What do you mean by that?
Monica asked.
The 6 of you are prominent figures in this world. The future is in your hands, and as I said earlier, nothing is certain. I'll teach you how to take over the world when needed, Rasmus answered with a serious expression. Your first assignment will be how are you going to gain recognition the people without using your privileges. Put your answer on the desk tomorrow before class starts. That's all for today, and you're all dismissed. Rasmus left the classroom and left an impression on the students. Monica was the first to stand up and walk out of class, then followed by Maximilian. The others left and went their separate ways while thinking about the assignment they were given by Rasmus. Lenin was staring at the statue in the center of the fountain. She noticed that Isidore and the others were walking in the hallway. She was confused because the class had just started an hour ago. What's the matter? Why are you in here?
Lenin looked at Isidore.
The class has ended, Chancellor, Isidore answered, and he was deep in thought. The class just started an hour ago. Is there a problem in the class? Lenin furrowed and looked worried.
No, Chancellor.
There's no problem, Isidore shook his head. Instructor Rasmus gave us a lecture and an assignment, he answered.
An assignment?
Lenin raised her eyebrows with curiosity. May I ask what kind of assignment Instructor Blackheart gave you?
She tilted her head.
How am I going to gain recognition from the people without using my privileges? Thinking about it makes me wonder because there are so many things I can do. But the question is what I want to do before I decide to gain their recognition, Isidore answered, and he was still troubled by that question. Lenin smiled, as someone that I know has said. Write with your heart, not with your head. But what if I was wrong? That my method wasn't the right thing to do. Isidore frowned, afraid that his method was childlike, innocent, and full of flaws. Lenin raised her brows, staring at Isidore for a brief moment before she let out a soft chuckle and covered her mouth with the back of her hand. Isidore was taken aback by Lenin's reaction, and he somehow felt embarrassed by what he had said earlier. My apologies, Isidore, but isn't that the point? Lenin crossed her arms and tilted his head, staring into Isidore's eyes. I don't understand, Chancellor. Isidore furrowed his brows, staring at Lenin with a confused look. That's what they call growth and progress, Isidore. If you want to start something from nothing, you make sure to start from what you believe in. You can't start something if you're not being honest with yourself, are you? Lenin answered with a soft and gentle voice. Write what you believe. Right or wrong isn't the priority because you grow and adapt. That's when you become wise and intelligible. Isidore's eyes were wide open, realizing Lenin's words had so much wisdom inside them. Thank you, Chancellor, you have opened my eyes. I'll excuse myself. Isidore bowed his head and then went to his dorm to begin his assignment. Lenin looked up at the main building with a gentle smile on her face, muttering under her breath, what an interesting way of teaching the students, Instructor Blackheart Rasmus watched the garden through the window in his classroom. He heard someone come in, and it was Maximilian with a paper in his hand. He watched Maximilian put the paper on the desk and went to his table.
May I?
Rasmus pointed at the paper on his desk as he looked at Maximilian. Maximilian nodded, and he never thought he would feel nervous about his writings. He spent almost his whole life holding weapons and training with people who were 2 times bigger than him, but he never felt nervous once. Rasmus didn't show any reaction as he read Maximilian's plans to gain recognition. It didn't take a while until he put down the paper and stayed quiet, which made Maximilian more nervous. Alexander came in, and he looked like a mess with his red eyes, showing that he stayed up all night to do the assignment. Valerie was similar, but he looked a bit better than Alexander. They both then put their assignments on the desk. Monica was checking her writings as she walked in the hallway, but then she stopped when she almost hit Aurelius, who was walking from the other side of the hallway. They both stared at each other and had scornful looks painted on their faces. "Are you two going in or not?" Isidore asked as he was waiting for them to get inside the class because they were blocking the door. Monica walked in first, while Aurelius walked into the classroom with Isidore. They all put their assignments on Rasmus's desk. Maximilian, Alexander, and Valerie were on the edge because Rasmus didn't show any reaction to their writings at all. The class was quiet because everyone was watching Rasmus read their assignments. They were all trained to read expressions and gestures, but they couldn't tell what Rasmus was thinking at all. The sound of the bell ringing startled them, and at the same time, Rasmus stood up as he held all the papers. "After reading all your answers, this is worse than I expected." Rasmus flapped the papers in his hands. "This assignment will be your secret weapon in the future, and this will be your masterpiece to rule the world, but none of you have the ambition to do so." Rasmus approached Maximilian's table and put down his paper downward so Monica couldn't see it. "You're going to be a tyranny with this plan. You're not that different from Balthazar, who occupied the north during his rule." Rasmus looked at Monica and put down her assignment on her table. "You'll achieve nothing with this. You're too straightforward, and people don't like a blatant truth." Rasmus went to Alexander's table and put down his assignment as he stared down at Alexander. "You'll be nothing but a tool by the others. You're being too passive and too scared to give promises. People need something to drive their willingness to follow you." Rasmus looked at Valerie and let out a big sigh as he put down Valerie's assignment. "You're going to lose everything if you give everything without asking something in return. You're a walking pot of gold." Rasmus stood in front of Aurelius, who looked nervous by what Rasmus was going to say. "You're going to be their slaves. Your kindness will be taken for granted." Rasmus looked at the last paper in his hand, and then put it at Isidore's table. "Too optimistic, too ambitious, too many empty words, too many promises, and lastly, too much of everything. Unrealistic." Although with Rasmus's blatant and harsh feedback, he didn't mock or make a fool of the students. He used that assignment to understand the students he was teaching and what kind of personality they had. It helped him to approach them and get to know them. If one day you were in a dire situation where everything was at risk, those writings are the plans that you're going to make, and as you have heard, you'll lose everything, Rasmus said as he sat on top of his desk. "But I can see the honesty in your writings, which is a good thing, but unfortunately honesty isn't always what they want to hear."
Now.
Rasmus stood up and collected the assignments again. "Wouldn't it be fun to read each other's assignment?" he asked with a mischievous smirk. Everyone panicked when Rasmus handed out their assignments to their classmates. They all felt embarrassed because it was, as Rasmus said, their writings that came from their hearts. They wanted to protest, but they knew that Rasmus wouldn't listen to them. They had no choice but to endure their embarrassment when others looked at their paperwork. Monica snickered when she read Aurelius's assignment, but then Aurelius reacted the same way when she read Monica's paperwork. They both looked at each other and realized they were looking at each other's paperwork. Isidore was stunned when he looked at Maximilian's paperwork, while Maximilian was confused by Isidore's paperwork. They looked at each other and they both were in disbelief with each other's writings. On the other hand, Alexander and Valerie were shocked that their writings were similar. They realized they both had the same way of thinking, which made them understand their flaws. "I want to hear your opinions about each other's writings. Let's start with you, Maximilian," Rasmus said as he went back to his desk and sat down. Everyone discussed and uttered their opinions without holding back. It was a productive and thought-provoking discussion in which everyone felt joy while at the same time making them learn about their flaws and weaknesses. They never thought attacking each other with an argument could be fun and exciting. They argued and discussed what would be the perfect plan to achieve recognition from the people. They tried as hard as they could to satisfy Rasmus with their perfect plan, but it never happened. Lennon was listening the whole time from outside the classroom. She couldn't stop smiling and chuckling quietly when she found out each student's mind and how they worked. She wished to barge in and join the discussion, but she held back and decided to leave because she had heard enough. Look at the time, Rasmus said as he looked at his wristwatch. We will end the class here. Everyone looked outside the window, and it was afternoon already. They didn't realize they had been arguing and discussing it for hours. They still had something that they wanted to utter, but they were unable to do so. If you want to keep discussing it, then go ahead. This academy has so many places for you to spend your time. If you all believe that you can come up with a perfect plan, then bring me the result on a piece of paper tomorrow morning. Rasmus stood up as he hid his wristwatch under the sleeve. Class is dismissed. Rasmus left the classroom and he was surprised to see Julian waiting for him. Chancellor Lennon is waiting for you in her office, Julian said as she glanced at the classroom where everyone talked with each other like normal students. This is my class, so I hope you can respect my students' privacy, Rasmus said as he closed the door behind him. Julian gave Rasmus a cold eyes roll, and she held back from responding to Rasmus's words. She escorted Rasmus to Lennon's office and was still in disbelief that those students could gather around like that. Chancellor, you're looking for me? Rasmus asked as he stood at the door.
Yes.
Please have a seat, Lennon smiled at Rasmus as she pointed at the chair across her desk. I overheard your class earlier, and I found it interesting that you managed to pull that off. Seeing how you and those students were sharing each other's thoughts, it was exciting that I wished I could join your lecture, Lennon said, still with a smile on her face. What you did, that's something that we needed. If only we had someone like you 400 years ago, maybe that event could be prevented, she muttered as she stared blankly at the chandelier. Thank you for the praise, Chancellor, Rasmus said. Rasmus narrowed his eyes a bit and thought about what Lennon had said earlier. From those simple comments, he knew that Lennon had no idea why the Great Era had happened. He wondered if he could entrust her with what he found since she was a great sage and he believed she wouldn't end up like Henry. But, you do remember that your class isn't just about sharpening their minds. They still need to train their bodies as well, and I'm curious if you need any help with that.
Lennon asked.
Rest assured, Chancellor. I can handle my students, but thank you for the offer, Rasmus answered with confidence.
I see. Well then, you may go, Lennon said.
Good work, Instructor Blackheart. Keep it up, she smiled and continued dealing with the documents on her desk. You're dismissed. Rasmus bowed his head before he left Lennon's office. Rasmus went back to his dormitory after he spoke with Lennon. He didn't expect Vidal to welcome him because he knew that Vidal was busy with his own business. He looked at the last term's curriculum and looked at the final exam. He never thought that the students were going on a campaign in the West. Their test was to subjugate beasts that had been disturbing the city on the furthest west of Neva. Subjugation of powerful beasts, that's something that a high-ranked knight would do, Rasmus mumbled as he kept reading the details. Compared to the last 2 terms, it's always the same, so I should see how strong my students are. He spent the whole night learning about the dangerous areas in the Neva world. He marked the areas that he could use for himself and for the students because beasts didn't exist back on Earth. Beasts exist because of the influence of a demonic energy that corrupts the dragon veins. It has been proven by the discovery of the corrupted dragon vein deep inside the Afiva mountain in the western Neva. Rasmus read the book out loud. Some of those beasts have turned into a completely different creature. They're demonic beasts that are extremely dangerous. Vidal entered the room and he was sneaky until he realized Rasmus was still awake. Is this true? Rasmus pointed at the book as he looked at Vidal. Vidal tilted his head with a confused look, but then he read the book in a second and Rasmus's thoughts. He knew all the contents of the book immediately. I don't know anything. I came to this world not long after I sent you to this world, Vidal answered as he poured himself a glass of water. Now that I think about it, something has been bothering me. He sat down on the sofa and made himself comfortable as he drank the water. Bothering you? That's new, Rasmus furrowed as he looked at Vidal from over his shoulder. When you told me to find information about the wraiths in the capital city, I smelled something familiar. A trace of smell that belongs to my kin. Vidal stared at Rasmus with a serious expression.
Demons.
Rasmus looked so confused.
Yes.
They do exist here in this world as well. I don't know how, but we know now that God sent them here. I have a bad feeling about this. We are not alone in this world, Vidal responded and stared into Rasmus's eyes, giving him a warning. Since you don't know anything, we can assume that they won't be your allies? Rasmus stood up and leaned against his desk.
You were right about us.
You said that we were inferior to humans when we weren't in our domain, Hell. My status as the ruler of Hell doesn't apply here, and any demons won't bow down before me, Vidal nodded in agreement. So, not only we go against humanity, we will also deal with demons? Rasmus asked, tapping his finger on his desk and staring at the book about the demonic beast. So this is the twist about this whole bet you made with God. Rasmus hummed and became curious about the history of demons in the Neva world. He left and went to the library to borrow a few books about demons, but to his surprise, there were none. He couldn't believe that the massive library in Gratland didn't have information about demons. He decided to rest and asked about it tomorrow morning. The morning came and Rasmus waited for Lennon to come out of her mansion. "Chancellor Lennon, can I borrow your time for a moment?" Rasmus approached Lennon as soon as she walked out of her mansion. "What do you need, Instructor Blackheart?" Lennon raised her eyebrows. "Do we not have any information about demons?" Rasmus asked. "That information can't be found anywhere, Instructor Blackheart. That information is too dangerous for the public, not even for royalties," Lennon answered and walked into the garden with Rasmus to go to the main building. "The reason is because that knowledge can be used for malice, and anyone can use it, which is why it's hidden from everyone." Rasmus never thought something like that was forbidden knowledge. Unlike on Earth, knowledge about demons was everywhere and everyone could read it. "Can I ask why are you interested in that?" Lennon looked at Rasmus with curiosity and suspicion. "I was looking for information on areas that are overwhelmed by beasts, then I stumbled about them as demonic beasts. I read about the origin of them and found something about corrupted dragon vein. Which is why I'm interested in learning about demons to find the root of it," Rasmus explained and told the whole truth. Are you perhaps interested in sending your students for a campaign?" Lennon asked and realized the reason why Rasmus asked about demons was nothing but curiosity. "Yes. These students are already above their peers in all aspects. I thought it would be great if I could see their abilities with my own eyes," Rasmus nodded. "The issue would be the existence of demons and how the dragon vein could be corrupted. If something as powerful as dragon vein could be corrupted, I'm afraid if we encountered demons, we wouldn't be able to deal with it," he added. "If you want to know about demons, you should ask your students. They're the ones who hold all the information about demons," Lennon pointed out as she stopped walking. "You know who those students are," she smiled and left. Rasmus was confused at first, but then he understood what Lennon meant. He went into the classroom and found everyone had already gathered. He looked at his desk and saw a piece of paper. He could tell everyone was eager to see him read their master plan. "Lady Aurelia and Lady Monica, can I speak with both of you for a minute?" Rasmus looked at both of them as he stood at the door. Aurelia and Monica stood up and left the classroom, still not wanting to walk side by side or be close to each other. In the hallway, Monica stood on the right wall, Aurelia stood on the left wall, and Rasmus stood in the middle. Although it looked awkward, Rasmus didn't try to persuade them to be friendly with each other. "The reason why I called you both is because I want to know if both of your families have any records about demons," Rasmus pointed out as he looked at them back and forth. "I know it's impossible for me to read any of those records, so I want to know if both of you have read anything about demons. Since I'm still too young and my mind isn't mature yet, they forbid me to go anywhere close to the records about demons for my own good," Aurelia answered and shook her head. "Yes, I have read all the records about demons and their existence. Although the Sancticus family and the Angelus family teach different religions, we share records and knowledge about demons because we both believe in the same evil entity," Monica answered. Aurelia didn't expect that Monica had read records about demons while she hadn't touched or learned anything about them. On the other hand, Monica didn't try to brag about it. In fact, she was suspicious as to why Rasmus wanted to know about the demons. "You can go back to the class, Lady Aurelia." Rasmus looked at Aurelia, signaling her to let him have some privacy with Monica. Aurelia left as she looked at them both for one last time before she went back into the classroom. "How much do you know?" Rasmus asked with his arms crossed. "Enough to turn a devoted follower of God into worshipping demons," Monica answered and judgingly stared at Rasmus. Rasmus didn't expect the answer to be that intriguing. When he thought about it, having Videl on his side made things easier even though Videl barely did anything for him. "If you wish to know about demons, even if you threaten me or torture me, I won't tell you," she pointed out.
Don't be so confident, Lady Monica.
"You never knew until you begged to be killed instead," Rasmus responded coldly. The way Rasmus stared into Monica's eyes made her feel uneasy. His eyes showed Monica that he wasn't lying and that he had watched countless people begging to spare their lives to him. "But that's not what I want. If you truly know about demons, then you should be able to handle demonic energy, is that correct?" Rasmus sighed.
Not currently.
"Unlike Aurelia, my divine power isn't as good as hers," Monica answered. "May I ask, why do you want to know how to handle demonic energy? Is there anyone you know that's currently being possessed by a demon?" "No, I'm planning to send you all to a campaign, somewhere deep into the area where beasts live. Since I don't know anything about demons, I'm afraid I can't send you all into dangerous areas without any preparation. That's why I'm asking you, Rasmus explained as he crossed his arms.
Then it can be arranged.
With Aurelia's power, I believe we will be safe no matter where we go, Monica responded with confidence.
Perfect.
Can you meet me after class? We need to discuss this, and I hope you can keep it a secret from everyone. Rasmus stared into Monica's dark blue eyes. Monica nodded, and then they both went back to class. Rasmus entered the class and everyone was still waiting for him to read their master plan. He grabbed the paper, folded it, and put it in his suit's pocket, confusing all the students. Today, we will have physical training. Change your attire and meet me in the training hall in half an hour, Rasmus said, and then left the classroom. Everyone sighed because they had been waiting for nothing. They left the classroom and went to the dorm to change their attire. They were curious as to why Rasmus suddenly wanted them to do physical training instead of discussing the assignment like the other day. They all went to the training ground and noticed other classes were using the training hall. There was no space left for them to use the hall, and they saw Rasmus sitting in the spectator seat on the side. You guys go and do some warm-ups. I want you to run around the training ground 10 times, Rasmus said as he looked at them. Maximilian didn't complain and immediately ran to do his lap. Alexander and Valerie followed him after. Isidore didn't want to lose face and tried to catch up with Maximilian. Aurelia and Monica watched the boys run in the training hall before they turned their gazes toward Rasmus. You both can take it easy, but that will affect my judgment. It would be impossible to not underestimate you for the whole year if you take the easy way. Rasmus looked at Aurelia and Monica. Monica started running and it had been a while since she had any physical training. Aurelia was the same because she always sat in her chair and learned about becoming a saint. Both of them were unfit for heavy training because they weren't meant to do that. All the students that were in the training hall couldn't help but look at the powerful figures running around the training ground. They never thought they would see them all together and how they tried to compete against each other. It felt like they were a part of history in the future because they witnessed something exclusive to them in a way. Instructor Blackheart. An instructor shouted as he looked at Rasmus. The students heard the name, and they all moved their gazes toward Rasmus. They began to whisper to each other because they knew the Blackheart family and the disgrace they did. Nobody liked the name Blackheart because of the rebellion that caused countless innocent lives to die because of it. Rasmus glanced at the instructor who was calling him, and he could see the smugness on that man's face. He knew that the man was trying to make everyone know about him and tried to put him down to his place as a disgrace and a fallen noble. He tried to remember the names of the instructors and remembered his family name, Sherm, a family that produced a lot of famous scholars. Rasmus ignored the man and kept observing his students, which only made the man annoyed. Acting all high and mighty only because you teach those students. I'm going to remind you that everyone here is equal, and you'll learn about it the hard way, the instructor warned and scoffed. Rasmus kept ignoring the man and didn't even bother to look at his face. Deep down, he couldn't stop smiling and chuckling internally. Maximilian was the first one to finish the warm-up without breaking any sweat. Isidore came in second, and he realized that he needed to improve his physical strength. Alexander and Valerie finished together and they both went on all four as they caught their breath. Monica is going to faint. Maximilian pointed out when he watched Monica staggering and could no longer walk properly. Aurelia isn't any better, Isidore added and watched Aurelia right behind Monica and her face was covered in sweat. Let them be, Rasmus approached the boys. I want to see how far those two can endure this training. They're trying their best and it's their choice, he added as he crossed his arms and watched Monica and Aurelia still compete against each other even in that state. Everyone has a few weaknesses, some weaknesses can be fixed, but some people believe they can't because they have weak mentality. With that being said, for the next 3 days, you will have to beat Maximilian or at least not get overlapped by him in the warm-up every morning before the class starts. Rasmus looked at Isidore, Alexander, and Valerie. The three of them looked at Rasmus in disbelief because Maximilian was a beast when it came to physical strength. As a Northern Star, he could easily do dozens of laps without breaking a sweat. It would be impossible, but they didn't want to complain because that just proved Rasmus's words. Give them hell, Rasmus patted Maximilian's left shoulder with a smirk painted on his face. Maximilian nodded and smirked as he looked at Isidore. He wanted to give Isidore the kind of hell that he endured as the Northern Star. Rasmus watched as Monica and Aurelia finished the 7th lap, but they both collapsed not long after. Their legs had given up and they couldn't deal with any more stress. They started crawling, which was embarrassing to watch. The other students looked at the future saints that were crawling on the ground. They didn't expect there to be a cruel and heartless instructor in the academy. They started hating Rasmus because of what he did even though they didn't know what had happened.
Are you both done?
Rasmus looked down at both of them, going down on one knee. Is this too hard for both of you, ladies? Should I let you rest and drink some water? He asked with a cold expression. Monica shook her head, and Aurelia didn't want to lose to Monica, so she also shook her head. They tried to get up, but their legs had completely given up. Then crawl until you finish the remaining laps, Rasmus said and walked away, ignoring the hateful gazes from the students. That's too much, Instructor Rasmus. They're women, and they can't be compared to us, Isidore protested as he looked at Rasmus in disbelief, raising his voice and glaring at him. Do you hear that, Aurelia? Rasmus looked over his right shoulder. Isidore said it's because you're a woman that you're weak. Aurelia slowly turned her head and gave a dead stare at Isidore. Isidore was surprised, and somehow it felt like he was in the wrong while it was obvious that Rasmus was the one who was at fault. You need to understand that not everyone appreciates an act of pity from someone else. You're just belittling her. Rasmus glanced coldly at Isidore. The whole training ground was focused on Aurelia and Monica, who were crawling. Isidore, Maximilian, Alexander, and Valerie couldn't do anything, and they knew that helping those two wasn't the right thing to do. Do you want to help them? Rasmus asked his students as he crossed his arms. If you want to help them, then you should know their struggles. Run for another 10 laps until your legs give up. Crawl with them, show them that they're not alone, he said with a serious expression. Maximilian didn't hesitate and started running as fast as he could until he reached his limit. Isidore and the others also did the same because they wanted to show Aurelia and Monica that they weren't alone. Alexander and Valerie could only do 5 laps, and their legs had given up, so they started crawling to finish the remaining 5 laps. Isidore collapsed on the 7th lap and started crawling on the 8th lap. On the other hand, Maximilian had done 10 laps and added 5 extra laps until he finally collapsed. The other students didn't dare to be on the training ground because the 6 most respected and powerful students were crawling on the ground. They felt bad for standing around them, so they went to the sides to sit down and watch those 6 students finish their training. Lennon heard about what was going on the training ground and checked it out with her own eyes. She was surprised to see the 6 students crawling with sweat all over their red faces. She then looked at the cold stare that Rasmus gave his students. Chancellor, this isn't right, the instructor said as soon as he approached Lennon. They can stop, but they're unwilling to do so, Lennon responded. I don't see anything wrong with these, especially seeing the 6 of them crawl together, which is something that the world should witness. You will never see anything like this where the sun crown and the wyvern crest, the Angelus and the Sancticus moved side by side. The instructor clenched his fists, hating the fact that Lennon, the chancellor of the academy, showed her favorability toward Rasmus. He who had been an instructor for 3 years had never been treated like that by Lennon. Yes, Chancellor. The instructor responded as he bowed his head, holding his anger in his voice. Lennon left unnoticed, and she was happy about what she saw in the training hall. She couldn't wait to see the results of Rasmus's training of those students of his. She believed that he alone could change the world into a better place. Rasmus sat down on the bench as he watched Maximilian help Monica walk while Isidore helped Aurelia walk. He still had a stoic and cold expression painted on his face when they approached them. I'm disappointed with the result, Rasmus said as he stared at them. I'm not disappointed by the results of the training or by how weak you guys are. I'm disappointed that all of you were feeding my ego and got eaten by my words. All of them furrowed and looked at Rasmus with confused looks as always. They didn't understand what he meant until he explained it to them. They began to understand the way he spoke and what was the wisdom behind it, so they stayed quiet and let him continue. I wouldn't be upset if all of you didn't listen to my words, but you all did, and it fed my ego and made you do things that you were unable to do, Rasmus explained as he looked at them. Let me ask you one thing. What did you gain from listening to my order? You made yourself suffer for nothing. If you all became the future king, saints, leader, and prominent figures that the world looked up to, and you got easily eaten by someone's words without thinking about the benefits you gain from it, you'll end up like this, Rasmus pointed out as he looked at their condition, exhausted and could barely stand. A gentle push would be enough to make you all fall. You thought that you were proving something, but the truth is you were only entertaining me. But you're our instructor. And as your students, of course, we will follow your order, Valerie said as he caught his breath while his legs were still shaking, unable to completely bear his weight. You should follow something reasonable to you. You know your limitations, and you should know that you can't do it. Don't prove to them that they're wrong, but show them that you're smarter than them, Rasmus looked at Valerie. You shouldn't have to prove to them that you can outrun and fight a hungry lion. You should show that by simply climbing the tallest tree you could escape from a hungry lion, Rasmus said as he looked at his students. Don't ever feed their ego, or worse, feed your own ego, because it'll blind you. Rasmus pulled out the assignment that his students had done. You all can rest for now because the training hall is still being used by the other students. Once they're done, we will begin the real training, Rasmus said as he walked to the side and sat down. All of them had no more strength in their bodies and realized that it was only the warm-up. They all followed Rasmus to the side and sat on the floor, letting their legs rest as they massaged them. I told you. Don't follow orders blindly, and now you're bearing the consequence of your action, Rasmus smirked as he read the assignment. Aurelia groaned and slowly she pouted as she massaged her numb legs. I can't, and I don't want to train anymore for the rest of the day, Aurelia responded as she stared at Rasmus. Then I'll give you an F on your physical examination later, Rasmus smiled mischievously. I'm still your instructor after all, and this is proving that authority beats anything. Aurelia sulked and stared at Rasmus with a scornful look on her face, but Maximilian laughed because he found it fascinating. Isidore and the others scoffed as they shook their heads after realizing that they were all being played around since the beginning. They didn't know what to do, but one thing they understood was the fact they had the right to complain, and if the task was impossible to do, they could report it to Lenin. Rasmus hummed as he read the assignment about their plans for gaining recognition from the people. He could see which part of the plan belonged to a certain student and which was from a collaboration of an idea. Not bad, Rasmus said as he kept reading the assignment. This is not bad at all, but not good enough. He looked at his students as he showed the paper in his hand. The problem with the plan is the fact you're still dependent on people for their recognition. You linger yourself with them so that it will entangle you and stop you from growing even further, Rasmus explained the flaw in the plan. Too much attachment will make you lose focus on your goal, and with that being said, don't put too much of your feelings and emotions on those people, Rasmus pointed out. That doesn't make any sense at all. If we don't do that, then how are we going to gain their respect and recognition? Isidore questioned Rasmus's explanation. As king, just because you love your people, that won't be enough to satisfy them. As long as you give them what they want and satisfy their needs, you'll be loved. You don't necessarily need to love them, you just need to do what needs to be done for your people, Rasmus answered. Then what's wrong if you love them as well? Isn't that a good thing? Alexander asked. It will prevent you from climbing higher because they will hold you down, Rasmus answered. You can simply break a single weed with your forefinger to reach the other side, but if there were thousands of weeds stacking in front of you, your forefinger couldn't even break them. By the time you managed to break them all one by one, you had grown old and had lost all your power while at the same time lost all the ties you had with the people that you loved, he pointed out. The thought-provoking discussion started again. After what Rasmus said, it showed them a new light, a new perspective about the way to become a great leader. There was a need for balance in showing sympathy and being pragmatic, something that they still considered a gray area, while the truth was that both could be black or white. They discussed this for hours, and Rasmus noticed the instructor had been forcing his students to keep using the training hall. The man was still pissed and annoyed that Rasmus ignored him and tried to make Rasmus and his students waste their time in the training hall. Are you still not finished? Rasmus asked the instructor with a laid-back behavior. Oh, we are planning to use the training hall for a whole day, the instructor smirked, hiding his anger and disgust toward Rasmus. I see, then tell me when you're done, Rasmus casually responded. Maximilian and the others noticed that the instructor was trying to prevent them from training on the training ground. They wanted to show their complaints, but Rasmus shook his head with a smile on his face. They realized Rasmus had a plan in mind. An hour had passed, and the instructor had been glancing at Rasmus and his students. He couldn't believe they could have sat there for hours talking with each other, wasting their time. Instructor, the students are exhausted, and there's nothing else we can do here, a student said to the instructor.
Nonsense. Keep training.
The instructor shouted, glaring at the student. Another hour passed and problems began to arise when a student fainted. Seeing that the instructor didn't care, gave a bad impression of him on his students. The students reported the issue to Julian, and she was furious at the instructor for forcing the students out for no reason. Rasmus stood up as he watched the students leave the training hall, while the instructor got a warning from Julian and reported it to Lenin. He was smiling coldly at the instructor when their eyes met. What did I say to you? Rasmus looked at his students as he walked backward to the center of the training hall. Don't feed someone's ego, and don't let your ego blind you, Monica smirked, understanding the lesson and how it worked flawlessly. Now you have learned how easy it is to deal with a problem without having to do anything. Rasmus spread his arms to show the whole training hall had become his. Come. It's time for training. Since everyone had recovered from their fatigues, they all stood up and followed Rasmus to the center of the training ground. Rasmus looked at the racks of weapons which offered so many different types of weapons. He used wind magic and flung a sword from the racks into his hand. He swung it and the handle was good enough for his grip. His students didn't expect Rasmus to be profound in controlling mana. Even though they were trained to control mana, they couldn't do it like he did it. It would take people decades to control mana, but he did it like mana was a part of his limbs. Maximilian, you're up for a spar? Rasmus pointed the sword down as he rested his hands on the bottom of the sword's handle. Are you sure about this? The Blackheart family was known for their amazing magic, not close combat, Maximilian asked with his eyebrows raised, staring at Rasmus with a condescending look. Never underestimate your opponent. If they challenged you to something that you're good at, it's either they're better than you or they have a few tricks to make you lose, Rasmus responded as he lifted his sword and pointed it at Maximilian. Maximilian hummed and went to grab the same sword as Rasmus to make it fair. He readied his stance and showed his perfection in holding a sword, intimidating Isidore and the others. He looked like an impenetrable wall by just standing there and menacingly staring at Rasmus. Don't hold back, Rasmus said as he transformed mana into aura. Maximilian was shocked by the amount of aura that Rasmus had produced. He did the same and his aura was a bit stronger than Rasmus. As a Northern Star, it was undoubtedly that he could maintain an incredible amount of aura in his body. They both dashed and exchanged blows which affected their surroundings and cracked the floors. At that moment Maximilian realized that Rasmus was strong and not someone he should underestimate. He knew that he had to take the spar a little more seriously. Rasmus smirked as he exchanged blows with Maximilian. Maximilian was annoyed that Rasmus was still able to make such an expression in a fight against him. He felt like he was being mocked by Rasmus, and at that moment he lost his focus, which was something that Rasmus had been waiting for. Rasmus raised his sword and swung it down vertically, forcing Maximilian to swing his sword up diagonally. The moment they clashed with the sword, Rasmus used the opportunity to move his left leg in between Maximilian's legs. Maximilian was so focused on the swords that he didn't realize Rasmus's left foot was right under him. In an instant, he fell down and Rasmus's sword was about to stab him right in between his eyes. He was shocked by what had just happened. Is this the famous Northern Star? Rasmus asked as he offered his hand. What did you do? Maximilian was still confused and couldn't understand what had happened to him. He put his left foot right in between your legs and swooped your right foot out. You slipped and he pulled your right shoulder down with his left hand, Monica explained to Maximilian. It was so fast that I could barely see it all. Unlike Maximilian, who was taught how to use weapons, Rasmus had the skills to disarm and take down his enemies. Rasmus was the infamous mercenary in his past life and was the best among the others. He knew every martial art that didn't exist in the Neva world, giving him a huge advantage when it came to close combat. Want a rematch? Rasmus asked as he stepped back and swung his sword around. Maximilian didn't say a word, but he readied his stance again, and now he took the fight more seriously. He didn't want to show too much because there were a few skills that he didn't want the others to see. They exchanged blows again, but this time Maximilian used his left fist to do a follow-up attack as soon as he clashed his sword with Rasmus's sword. He didn't expect Rasmus to drop the sword and used both hands to grab Maximilian's left arm. Rasmus showed his back to Maximilian as he pulled Maximilian's left arm to his front, forcing Maximilian to get close to him. Rasmus used the momentum and pushed his right leg to the back, lifting Maximilian's whole body in the air, forcing Maximilian to do a somersault over Rasmus's body. He slammed Maximilian to the ground and it was enough to stun Maximilian. He pulled out a dagger that was hidden under his suit and put it on Maximilian's neck. You lose again, Rasmus said as he looked down at Maximilian. Do you want another rematch? He smirked and his brows were raised. No. You were holding back, and I know I can't win against you, Maximilian said as he stared into Rasmus's eyes with curiosity. I did because you didn't want to take this spar seriously. Maybe the result might be different if you decided to go all out, Rasmus responded as he helped Maximilian stand up. Valari, you're next, Rasmus said as he played around with the dagger in his right hand, moving it in between his fingers. Valari grabbed a dagger since he had mastered the dagger arts as his weapon of choice. In the end, the result was similar to Maximilian's fight, but the difference was Rasmus always took the dagger from Valari's hand. They couldn't believe that Rasmus was fearless even though he might lose his finger or even his hand when he tried to disarm Valari. Isidore also experienced what those two experienced and understood what Maximilian felt. He was thrown back and forth like a bag, and he didn't see them coming as if his eyes betrayed him. Alexander fell for the same trick that Rasmus did to the others. Although he had observed Rasmus's movements during his fight with the other before him, Alexander still made the same mistake as them. 4 of you, come and fight me. Rasmus looked at Maximilian, Isidore, Alexander, and Valari. The 4 of them attacked at the same time, thinking that it would corner Rasmus. Knowing that Alexander was the least skilled compared to the other 3, Rasmus immediately disarmed him and used him as a shield. Their plan failed immediately, and seeing he used Alexander as a shield, they stopped attacking, and that was when he incapacitated him. He targeted Valery next since he was easy to disarm and took him down before Maximilian and Isidore could do anything. Rasmus grabbed the dagger with his left hand and tossed it to his right hand. He coated the dagger with a dense aura, and when it clashed with Isidore's sword, it shattered the wooden sword into pieces. "You're dead." Rasmus used the bottom of the hilt to hit Isidore right in the chest where his heart was. Rasmus kicked Isidore and sent him away, but that was when Maximilian used the opportunity to appear behind him. Rasmus smirked as he glanced over his shoulder, forming a fireball right next to Maximilian's left ear.
Watch out! Monica shouted.
Rasmus snapped his finger and exploded the fireball. Maximilian was thrown by the explosion, and if he didn't use aura on the left side of his body, he would die. On the other hand, Rasmus was fine since he created a mana wall on his back, preventing him from getting hit by his own magic. At that moment, everyone remembered that Rasmus was a mage. During the spar, he didn't use any magic and only used his physical strength, which caught them off guard. "I'm not going to say that you all lack teamwork because I'm not going to teach you how to be too dependent on each other." Rasmus paused to squat and looked at Maximilian and the others. "I want you to learn how to use each other to reach the goal. That goal is to beat me, and with that being said, it's time for you two misses to fight me." Aurelia and Monica looked at each other for a moment, and then they created magic circles on their hands as they stared at Rasmus. They knew how good Rasmus was at controlling mana to the point he didn't need to use any magic formation. They knew that it would be hard to win against him, but they didn't have any choice. Rasmus understood how mana worked in this world and what he was capable of doing with it. Magic was like a mathematical equation where the magic formation showed the result of the equation. He knew how to handle Aurelia and Monica's magic spells before they could release them, making it easy to deflect and neutralize their magic. The world of Neva wasn't as advanced as on Earth in terms of science, and they still didn't understand that physics and magic were related since mana itself was a natural element. There was one thing that he found out during his time learning about mana and magic: he could interrupt and manipulate someone's magic by messing up the equation and disturbing the mana consumption. He didn't want to show his ability to manipulate or dispel someone's magic because he wanted to use it to his advantage. It was as simple as manipulating mana and affecting the magic formation. Anyone could do it if they understood math, but that wouldn't happen anywhere near the future. Not only that, he could create a mana barrier that followed the same rules as a nanoparticle shield. He turned mana into small particles and layered it over and over until it became a barrier. Unlike the magic barrier where they turned mana into specific elements to become a shield, it lacked consistency and wasted a lot of mana in the process. Aurelia and Monica couldn't understand that their superiority in magic couldn't get through Rasmus's defense. Aurelia could control the 4 elements, but she mastered the earth and wind elements. She was confident with her ability, and yet her wind and earth magic couldn't penetrate his mana barrier. Monica could also control 4 elements and mastered both wind and water elements. She couldn't break Rasmus's defense even though she had exhausted herself. They both were categorized on the Arcane Stage 1, and they were more amazing in handling mana than most people, including Rasmus. They could see the amount of mana that lingered around Rasmus's body. They couldn't believe someone could manipulate and organize mana as he did. They had seen amazing mages, and they realized that he was among them or even superior to those mages. After they tried their best to the point they were on the brink of mana's depletion state, they knew it was impossible to harm him with magic. They collapsed and decided to admit defeat because they couldn't push themselves anymore. That's the end of today's class. You're all dismissed, and now it's time for you to make your own plan to gain recognition from the people. Since you have grasped everything, I have high expectations, so don't disappoint me, Rasmus said as he looked at his students.
And one more thing.
Before the class starts tomorrow, I want you to do a warm-up together. You can do it early in the morning or before class starts. It's up to you, and if you don't do it, it will affect your grades, Rasmus added, and then left the training ground. Alexander sighed as he lay down on the ground, staring at the tall ceiling. He never thought the life he would get in the academy was harder than he expected. He thought he would have a smooth sailing experience, but it was nowhere near what he had expected. Have any of you met someone like him? Alexander looked at the others. I have met countless people, but nowhere near this guy. His way of thinking is dangerous, and yet somewhat it's something that I believe necessary to learn, Isidore answered. It's not dangerous. What he taught us is the harsh reality of this world. You believe it's dangerous because it's against your way of thinking and affects what you believe. For me, his way of thinking is the way to overcome every situation, Maximilian responded as he stood up. At this point, I can say that I don't regret coming all the way here to learn, he added, and decided to lay down and thought about the spar he had with Rasmus. Rasmus left the training ground and saw Instructor Sherm, who had received a warning from Lenin. He knew the man was waiting for him to be alone by the look in the man's eyes filled with hatefulness. "Hey! Where do you think you're going, bastard?" The instructor glared at Rasmus when Rasmus walked past him. "None of your business, peanut brain," Rasmus said without even bothering to look back at the instructor. "Mind your own business or you'll regret it." The instructor was blinded in rage and didn't hesitate to cast a fireball. He threw the fireball at Rasmus, but he noticed that the fireball grew larger as it traveled. The moment it hit Rasmus, the explosion was heard and attracted everyone's attention. Rasmus was thrown with his body covered in blood and a few broken bones. His back was almost burned to a crisp because of the fireball. The instructor was trembling and didn't expect his fireball to create such destructive power. Students and the staff started appearing and looking at what had happened. Maximilian and the others saw Rasmus lying on the ground with open wounds on his back. Aurelia and Monica hurriedly ran toward him and used their healing magic, which was their divine power. "What have you done, Instructor Sherm? Didn't I just give you a warning?" Lenin stared at the instructor with a menacing glare. "From this moment, you'll no longer teach in this academy." She cast a spell and shackled Instructor Sherm with chains made of stone that appeared from the ground. "You'll be put on trial for attempting murder. The authority will come to pick you up," Lenin said, and then went to check on Rasmus's condition. "Chancellor, please listen to my explanation first." Instructor Sherm yelled with a panicked expression. Lenin ignored the instructor's words and looked at Rasmus's condition quite severely. If Aurelia and Monica weren't there, he would have died from the wounds and blood loss. "How is he?" Lenin asked Aurelia and Monica. She looked at the flesh and bones that were exposed in Rasmus's back. "He needs to be treated immediately. We stopped the bleeding and we did our best to close the wound," Aurelia answered as she kept pointing her hands on Rasmus's back, which was slowly regenerating its flesh and skin. Lenin nodded with understanding and immediately covered Rasmus's back with her cloak. Rasmus opened his eyes and saw the stars outside the window next to his bed. He heard a crunch beside him and saw Videl eating his apple while staring at him. "You're a daredevil." Videl stared at him and he looked a bit pissed. "You know, if you died, it would be bad for both of us." "But I didn't. I was the one who modified his magic formation, and I knew how much power my body could handle. I also protected my organs with mana. Everything was calculated," Rasmus responded as he looked at his burned skin. "I just need to know how the world sees me as the Blackheart and their prejudice toward me, so I know what kind of move I should make to ruin this world," he explained. "And how is this connected to that? You're hurting yourself, and somehow it will help you see the world how they look at you." Videl furrowed with a confused look. "Just wait," Rasmus smirked and stared at the stars again. The morning came, and Videl stayed by Rasmus's side the whole night. Someone entered the infirmary, and it was Lenin who came. She didn't say a word while she checked on Rasmus's condition. When she noticed that he would be fine, she let out a sigh of relief. "Instructor Sherm is currently being transported to court, and they're going to need you to be present in court." "Can you do it?" "Because they want to hear what happened from your side of the story," Lenin asked. "Is that even necessary? Isn't it already obvious what happened back there?" Rasmus furrowed and stared at Lenin. After the investigation team came, they found the odd about the magic he released and the damage it caused. Instructor Sherm isn't profound in fire magic, and somehow the spell he released was somewhat beyond his capability, Lenin explained with her arms crossed. "There could be something else that happened, and that's why they wanted to hear from your side of the story," she pointed out. "I understand, and my body is good enough to attend the trial," Rasmus said as he sat up slowly. "Then we will leave at noon," Lenin nodded with understanding. "Get some rest for now," she said and then left. Rasmus looked at Videl as he raised his eyebrows. "This is what I'm talking about. Arcane stage, which meant they could detect mana, sense the flow of mana, and smell mana. Mana had a scent and it could be used to inform them that someone could sense mana or not. The scent could also tell how powerful someone was by smelling how soft or strong the scent of the mana around them was. Only 0.4% of Neva's population was gifted with this ability. Rasmus put his suit on, and thanks to Aurelia and Monica, he had recovered completely. He was amazed by how powerful divine power was, and it was more fascinating than magic. He was accompanied by Videl to the main building where Lenin was waiting for him. He saw 2 carriages with the Gratlin Academy emblem on it. "Ready to leave, Instructor Blackheart?" Lenin asked as she stood next to the carriage, looking at his unique attire that she had never seen before. "Yes, Chancellor," Rasmus nodded as he adjusted the collar of his shirt. "Your butler can go to the next carriage with my maids and butler. There should be a spot left," Lenin looked at Videl and pointed at the carriage behind Lenin and Rasmus's carriage. There are a lot of things that I want to ask in private, so shall we? She pointed at her carriage. We shall, Rasmus gracefully bowed and then walked toward the carriage with Lenin walking behind him. Rasmus could see Videl smile even though he couldn't see his face. He already knew what would happen in that carriage and he hoped that it wouldn't leave any stain or smell in there. Rasmus and Lenin entered the carriage and left the academy to the courthouse. Since the journey to the courthouse was quite far and would take an hour, Rasmus grabbed his notebook from his suit. He read his writings and methods about mana, magic, and aura with mathematical equations. Lenin was curious about the writings and wanted to take a peek at Rasmus's notebook. The moment she could see a glimpse of it, Rasmus slowly tilted the book toward his body and prevented Lenin from seeing it. Why did you put random numbers on each rune that you wrote in that book? Lenin asked since she saw a glimpse of a page in the notebook. It's my way to understand magic, Rasmus answered as he kept reading the notebook. It's easier for me to understand them, and allows me to experiment with these numbers, he explained. Lenin was sitting across from Rasmus, but she suddenly sat beside him because she was intrigued by the content of his notebook. But before she could see the content, Rasmus closed the notebook and looked at her with his eyebrows furrowed. Chancellor, with all due respect, I don't want anyone to read my writings, Rasmus said with a serious expression, showing that he wasn't playing around and didn't care if the person he was talking to was his boss. That's fair, but how about we exchange information? I'll give you my writings that I don't plan on publishing and you can let me read that notebook, Lenin offered and pointed at the notebook in Rasmus's right hand. Rasmus smiled, and then stood up and moved to the seat across from him. He wasn't interested in sharing because what he wrote could bring chaos that he couldn't handle. He put the book in his pocket and decided to look outside the window at the beautiful scenery. Count Blackheart, I heard of your methods when you taught those villagers in the Hergel village. You used a unique one that I found hard to understand. Lenin crossed her legs and arms, staring into Rasmus's eyes. Rasmus noticed that Lenin used his title rather than his job as an instructor. He noticed this conversation had nothing to do with the academy at all, and it became more personal. It's not that hard to understand. Everything I taught them, they have existed hundreds or even thousands of years ago. It's a natural phenomenon that people oftentimes look over it, Rasmus answered with a serious expression. I don't remember your father learning magic from that, Lenin responded, keeping her eyes on Rasmus's. You know you can stop asking around the bushes, great sage. Rasmus stared at Rasmus with a cold gaze. Lenin knew that Rasmus could understand her intentions. She then placed her hands on her thigh, making herself comfortable in the carriage. The people that you killed when they visited your cabin, who were those people?
Lenin asked.
They called themselves the Wraiths. I don't know much about them, but one thing that I know of is that they're working for powerful people. Their job is to eliminate people that might endanger those powerful people, a bunch of assassins if I must say, Rasmus answered. So you killed them before you knew who they were until you interrogate the leader? I believe that's a wrong order to do that, Lenin said and she tried to read Rasmus's expression.
It's simple.
Nobody would come to talk if they brought that many people. Especially when they all looked at me dead in the eye. It's that easy to understand that they came for no good reasons, Rasmus replied with a stoic expression. Lenin wanted to argue, but she knew she couldn't win when the fact that he was right, and he didn't harm innocent people. She began to understand Rasmus's personality based on what she observed and heard. She found out that Rasmus was a pragmatist and that he saw things through the lens of his reality. So, they came to kill you, the last Blackheart? Lenin raised her brows.
Yes.
Fortunately, they came a little bit too late. If they had come a year ago, I might have died, Rasmus nodded as he looked outside the window, enjoying the journey and scenery. Do you know why? Lenin tilted her head slightly.
Who knows?
Do you know why my father raised his banner and killed the king and his whole family? Rasmus asked back, glancing at Lenin with a serious expression. If we look at it from a glance, my father was a madman, but if you really look at it thoroughly, there's no way he suddenly decided that in a single night. There must be reasons, valid ones for him to do a rebellion, he added. It's funny that they shoved the details under the rug and just focused on the things my father did without questioning why. I wonder if you think the same as them or do you think critically from a different perspective? Rasmus asked. And you find your father's action is justified? No, I shouldn't ask that question. Lenin shook her head and knew Rasmus wasn't that kind of a person. Let me rephrase my question. What makes you think he did it for valid reasons? She crossed her legs again, but it was the other way around this time. I wouldn't dare to say anything if I don't know the whole thing, but I can say that the Wraiths thought that I knew and they had to eliminate me to keep those valid reasons hidden under the rug, Rasmus answered. Now that we are on this topic. How much do you know about my parents, great sage? Rasmus asked because he remembered she was present during the execution of his whole family with the Council of Neva. I know your father very well. He was a genius, an impossible egg to crack. He became the most trusted aide to the king because he was the best sage that I know. Lennon looked away, remembering the days when she taught Erglay during his enrollment in the Gratlin Academy. For your mother, I don't know anything about her. All I know is the fact your mother is an Orpheus.
An Orpheus?
What's that? Rasmus furrowed his brows. He had never heard anything about them or what they were.
Of course you don't know.
It's a hidden history from the public. Only old families that have existed for thousands of years know about their existence, Lennon answered as she crossed her arms and looked at Rasmus. You'll find about in the magic tower, so if you want to know, I'll give you everything that you need, she added. Lennon looked outside the window and she realized they had arrived at the council palace, located in the center of the island. We have arrived, and there are a lot of people, Lennon said as she looked at the journalists who were waiting for their arrival. So they have journalists on the island, Rasmus said as he looked at the crowd.
Of course.
Anything that happens on the island, the whole world wants to know. We are the center of the world after all, Lennon answered as the coachman opened the door for her. Let's continue our conversation another time, Count Blackheart, she said and walked out of the carriage. That's exactly what I needed, both of them, Rasmus said under his breath as he walked out of the carriage. Rasmus walked through the crowd and everyone was talking about his family name. They didn't believe that there was still a member of the Blackheart family that still existed and became an instructor at the Gratlin Academy. Their eyes showed different reactions when they stared at him. Rasmus entered the courthouse and so many people came to watch the trial. Attempting murder at the Gratlin Academy between instructors was something that had never happened before. That was why there were so many people who wanted to know the truth. Who's going to represent me, Chancellor? Rasmus asked. Me. I'm representing you and the dignity and integrity of the Gratlin Academy, Lennon answered as she walked to the table. There's one thing I want you to do, and that's not to do any kind of provocation, she said as she sat down. I'll try my best, Rasmus responded and sat beside Lennon and fixed his suit. I need to remind you that the Sherm family is a well-known and respectful family because they produced famous scholars who have contributed a lot to Neva for centuries. With that being said, everyone here will support the Sherm family while they can, Lennon pointed out and looked at the jury and the people who came to watch the trial. That doesn't sound good knowing they have a prejudiced view toward the Blackheart family as well, Rasmus responded. I know you're sharp, Instructor Blackheart. I hope you can refrain from provoking anyone in this courthouse, Lennon said. Let me handle this, and it will be over before you know it. Rasmus nodded with understanding and decided to observe quietly. The trial began with both parties having addressed the issue, and it was enough to say the barrister who represented Sherm was good at his job. His calm demeanor and how he admitted that what happened in the academy was Sherm's fault made his motives unpredictable. Your Honor, may I ask a few questions to Rasmus Blackheart? The barrister asked the judge. The judge nodded and ordered Rasmus to sit in the witness box. Your Honor, before I ask him a few questions, there's something I would like to address, the barrister said as he looked at the jury and the spectators. What Instructor Sherm did was wrong, and he admitted that he used magic to assault Rasmus Blackheart. Everyone gasped and began to murmur about what the barrister was talking about. The judge had to calm down the courtroom. But the real issue is that the attempt of murder wasn't the truth. There are reasons as to why I'm confident with my statement, the barrister pointed 3 fingers out. First, the investigation team stated that the magic that Instructor Sherm did wouldn't be able to cause that much damage. It has been proven before Instructor Sherm became an instructor and was tested by Chancellor Lennon herself about his magic ability, the barrister pointed out. Second, everyone knows that the Blackheart family is talented in magic. With that being said, he should be able to detect magic or mana, and he should be able to protect himself, but he didn't as if he did it on purpose, the barrister looked at Rasmus. Third, we received news that Rasmus Blackheart was invited and recommended by Chancellor Lennon herself. Not only that, they didn't test his skills and abilities, unlike the other staff in Gratlin Academy. With that being said, we can understand how talented and amazing his skills and abilities are, the barrister pointed out as he looked at the jury and the spectators. Now my question to Rasmus is, are my statements all true? The barrister stared into Rasmus's eyes. Other than the first statement, they're true, Rasmus nodded calmly. This trial is for Instructor Sherm for attempting murder, but that's not true at all. There are still mysteries behind this incident, and I believe that Rasmus Blackheart himself was the one who fabricated the incident, the barrister stated with confidence. Everyone gasped once again and began to assume and speculate while connecting the statements that the barrister made with the accusation that he stated. Do you have anything to say, Instructor Blackheart? The judge stared at Rasmus with a blatant prejudice written on his expression. In Rasmus's previous life, he attended so many trials that he did more trials than spending his whole life on a vacation. He knew how everything worked in a trial, and he knew he was standing on a ledge while the judge, jury, and everyone in the courtroom were waiting for him to jump off. In court, he could try to prove his innocence through his words, but in that kind of situation, that would be impossible. His words would be used against him, knowing the barrister was a competent one. No, Your Honor. Rasmus shook his head as he looked at Lenin. His only way to prove his innocence wasn't through his mouth but through Lenin's mouth. Lenin was the chancellor of the best academy in the world, and she was the descendant of the most powerful great sage. Because of it, her words weighed more than his, and that was his only way to win the trial. May I approach the victim, Your Honor?
Lenin asked. You may approach the victim, the judge nodded.
Lenin stood in front of Rasmus, who was standing in the witness box. They communicated through their eyes, and then Lenin cleared her throat as she turned around to look at the juries and the spectators. Allow me to clear the fog that's happening here in the courtroom, Lenin said. Before the incident happens. Lenin revealed what Sherm did during his class and what he had done to his students. She told them that he didn't want to let Rasmus use the training ground by using the whole facility for himself for hours. That resulted in students' exhaustion and made a few students collapse and faint. She informed them that she gave Sherm a direct warning about his actions. She then told them the incident happened not long after that, which led to Sherm planning to harm Rasmus. She allowed the judge, jury, and spectators to understand the whole situation and not just half of the story. She erased the speculations from the spectators and juries with calm and dignified manners. As I have explained, Instructor Blackheart has no sign of provocation toward Count Sherm. Everything that happened was all because of Count Sherm's ignorance and prejudice toward Count Blackheart, Lenin said as she looked at Sherm with disappointment.
Objection, Your Honor.
Rasmus Blackheart provoked Instructor Sherm by insulting his brain as big as a peanut, the barrister said. Using violence and harming Instructor Blackheart because of an insult? Is that how the respectable Sherm family reacts to an insult? Lenin asked the barrister. If words alone are enough to make him harm someone and almost kill them, I don't believe he would be in the right no matter what, she said calmly. The barrister didn't have anything to say because he didn't want to cause more damage to Sherm. Rasmus was smirking and knew that it was the right choice to let Lenin handle the case. Allow me to clear the statements that were presented in court, Lenin said as she looked at the jury. The first statement where Count Sherm's magic wouldn't be able to cause that much damage is false. In the latest research about magic by a famous and named scholar, it has been proven that we can't control magic completely, Lenin explained. Mana is the source of magic and the cause of its instability, which is why we created a magic formation to cast a spell to prevent that from happening. In the latest research, it was stated that even with magic formations, our body played a big factor and it connected with our bodies and minds. Not only that, this whole island is the result of overwhelming mana which made it float in the sky. This also adds a new factor as to why Instructor Sherm's magic became unpredictable, Lenin added.
Objection, Your Honor.
The research that Chancellor Lenin has spoken, there's no proof of that, the barrister said. That's why I brought the scholar who did the research, Lenin responded and looked at the spectators. Marquis Sherm, if you may, she looked at an old man blending in with the crowd. Everyone looked at the old man and it shocked Sherm when he saw his father testify against him. He realized at that moment that he had been disowned by his father and by his family for the embarrassment he had caused and tarnished the Sherm family. I swear to my family name on the line that what Chancellor Lenin said is the truth. Unfortunately, the research is still ongoing and I'm unable to reveal everything due to public safety, the old man said. The barrister couldn't fight against it and was unable to think of a way to change the situation. The second and third statements about Instructor Blackheart didn't try to protect himself because of the agreement that we both made. Lenin looked at Rasmus and then looked at the jury. As you have heard, Instructor Blackheart insulted Count Sherm. He has a habit of provoking people, and the reasonable answer to that is because it's his defense mechanism. He's the only Blackheart left in this world. He has to bear the sins, consequences, and pain that his family did. As we all know, the Blackheart family tried to rebel against the Rufinus kingdom, and that led to the execution of all the Blackheart family members excluding him, Lenin pointed out. For a 14-year-old boy who knew nothing about the world, abandoned and punished for 10 years. If you found a wild beast and you tried to disturb it, what do you think it would do? It would retaliate and attack you, Lenin continued as she crossed her arms. He provoked not only Instructor Sherm, but he also provoked the chairman during his interview. It was his way to survive, and that was when we agreed to put him on trial and became an instructor of the academy for half a year, but with an exception which nobody knows about, Lenin pointed her forefinger up. If he caused any trouble more than 3 times, I would kick him out of the academy. That was why he didn't try to protect himself to avoid any trouble, she added. If Instructor Sherm hadn't provoked him in the first place because of his prejudice and ego toward Instructor Blackheart, nothing would have happened. If Instructor Sherm didn't come back to confront Instructor Blackheart, he wouldn't be here on a trial, Lennon said as she raised her voice a bit. He poked a wild beast and expected it to flee, but instead the beast ate his finger. You can't blame the beast for eating his finger, you will blame him for poking a wild beast. Lennon looked at the jury with a serious expression. That's all, Your Honor. She moved her gaze toward the judge and then walked back to her seat. Everyone went quiet and began to understand the whole story behind the incident. Seeing how everyone understood the situation, the barrister knew that there was no chance to turn the table. The juries left the courtroom to evaluate all the information they got from both parties. Everyone was waiting impatiently for the juries to give their answers. But Rasmus already knew the result, not because of what Lennon said only, but also because of Sherm's father who stood against his son. Sherm might be from a famous and respectable family, but that didn't mean he was famous and respectable. The juries, the judge, and the spectators respected the head of the family, not his children. Once the head of the family decided to disown his son, the jury and the judge could deal with the case without any pressure. The juries came back and gave their answers to the judge on a piece of paper. The judge looked at the answer and then looked at Sherm with a cold expression. The juries have given their answer, and found the defendant guilty of attempting murder toward Instructor Rasmus Blackheart and will be sentenced to 30 years of imprisonment, the judge announced. Rasmus's case and his past were known worldwide, full of suffering and hardship. Everyone didn't know at first that the Blackheart family still existed if it wasn't for the case. They were curious about what kind of a person Rasmus was that the journalist made him famous by giving him the title of a wild beast.
Wow!
Vidal gave Rasmus a standing ovation after he read the newspaper.
You've done it.
I didn't expect your plan to go so smoothly, he scoffed and was in awe. This isn't my first ride. Rasmus enjoyed his coffee as he looked at students in the garden through the window of his room. This is what I like about this world that doesn't have advanced technology. People are in for something spicy because it's not easy to access any information around the world. Using this case to make yourself known to the world. I don't think there's any better way of doing that compared to what you did. Vidal sat down and grabbed an apple from the basket. Simply just making yourself injured and now you went viral, he scoffed as he shook his head. Rasmus opened his notebook and wrote Sherm's family name on it. He thought about the research that Lennon revealed during the trial and the Sherm's family head who was a famous and respectable scholar who specialized in mana and magic. It's time for my class. Rasmus emptied the cup of coffee and grabbed his suit. Rasmus, can I ask you one thing? Vidal glanced at Rasmus with a serious expression. Rasmus saw Vidal's serious expression as he put on his suit. He nodded, telling Vidal to ask whatever he had in mind. Are you planning to make those students of yours your accomplice in the future?
Vidal asked. Accomplice?
They're bound, chained by their roles. I might be able to change their way of thinking, but they won't be able to change who they truly are. Too much pressure from their surroundings, and I don't believe they will be freed from those chains. Their eyes aren't like mine, Rasmus answered as he adjusted his suit. So, you're wasting your time here? Vidal raised his brows. Not really. Although I can't change them, my impression will stay deep inside them. To put it simply, I'm living inside their heads, Rasmus answered as he looked at Vidal. Connection, that's all that matters, he added and then left his dorm. Rasmus went to class and didn't expect all his students to be already in their seats. He walked to his desk and sat on top of it, staring at them silently. He thought about the conversation he had with Lennon in the carriage about his mother, Aristoria.
An Orpheus.
I wonder what that means. Rasmus sighed.
Instructor.
Aurelia tilted her head, confused by the silence. Is everything all right, Instructor?
Isidore asked.
Everything is fine, Rasmus responded with a calm expression. Hand me the assignment. He reached out his hand. Everyone stood up and pulled out their papers, which surprised Rasmus because it was supposed to be a group assignment. He then grabbed all the papers and went around his desk to sit in his chair. While Rasmus was busy checking everyone's assignments, the silence was deafening for everyone. They all looked at each other and they were thinking the same thing. Ask away, no need to be so shy, Rasmus said as he read Maximilian's assignment. He could feel the gazes of his students. Everyone looked at Monica since she was the only one who wasn't bothered by the silence. They signaled to her to ask the question since she had also had a conversation with Rasmus before. Instructor, we were in the courthouse during your trial. We listened to the Chancellor's words when she defended you. She called you a wild beast, And I wondered why she knew about all that and what was the reason she called you that, Monica asked, staring at Rasmus who was busy checking their assignments. Rasmus stopped reading the assignment and slowly put the paper down as he stared at his students. They all felt anxious by the silent stare of him as he rested his head on his fist. Before I answer those questions, let me ask you this. How much do you all know about the Blackheart family and about what happened to them? Rasmus asked with a stoic expression. The Blackheart family is one of the oldest families in Neva, and they share the same blood as the royal family. About your father, we knew that he was one of the great sages and the most respected man in the southeast of Neva, Alexander answered. Everyone nodded in agreement because they heard the same thing. The fact they knew that much meant Erglade was famous all over Neva. Rasmus kept hearing the same thing until he looked at Isidore, who seemed to have something to say. What about you, Isidore? Rasmus asked. Isidore was taken by surprise when he got called out by Rasmus. Isidore paused to think for a moment. I heard from my father that Erglade Blackheart was the leader of the Black Cloak. It's a division that only the king knew and their job was to eliminate threats, he continued as he looked at Rasmus. It was the first time Rasmus heard about that and it intrigued him, making him want to know more. Why have I never heard about that? Can you elaborate on how you know that? Rasmus raised his brows. My father knew everything in central Neva, and since the Rafinus kingdom was one of the Sun Empire's vassal states before Erglade Blackheart took down the kingdom. I don't know about the details and that's all I know, Isidore answered nervously. Rasmus stared into Isidore's eyes and he realized that the Sun Empire or the Sun-Crown family did know everything since they were the ones who won during the Great Era. He was so eager to dig up some information about their past, but it would be too obvious. Thank you for telling me, Rasmus said as he stood up from his chair. Now, let me tell you my story. He walked around the desk and stood in the middle of the classroom. Rasmus began to tell his tale after he was banished, exiled, and abandoned when he was still a child. He explained how he ended up in Hergel village by getting into a random wagon one day after he was hunted and harmed by everyone. He vividly explained how the villagers kicked him away and closed the gate in front of him and how he ended up in the abandoned cabin deep in the forest. His students listened to his story without blinking their eyes, imagining it was them in the story. They imagined themselves starving for weeks before they could hunt rats or insects to fill their stomachs. It was horrible to imagine, and the fact Rasmus endured that for more than a decade was unimaginable. One day, I thought to myself that I can't live like that anymore, Rasmus said as he sat on top of his desk. That I need to change after I learned from my experience that not everyone is heartless. That's when I began to see how to read a person's personality and how nature works, he continued as he stared at the spot on the wooden floor. I survived and learned many things at least in the last decade. I understand people, learn from them, and use it to survive. I bear my fangs and claws as my only choice to live, Rasmus said and looked at his students' expressions. They all were touched by his resilience and understood his suffering, which he had been trying to do. After things went smoothly, Chancellor sent someone to look for me and found me in the village a few months ago. She found out what I did and what I contributed to the village. She was interested in how I taught the villagers mana and magic, and not long after that I got a letter, a recommendation letter from the Chancellor herself. Rasmus showed a faint smile. And now here I am, teaching you brats how to see the world at its worst and how to survive that, he scoffed as he crossed his arms. All the students chuckled at his words and the atmosphere immediately became lighter. Look at the time. I was supposed to check all of your assignments. Rasmus looked at his wristwatch. Instructor, what's that on your wrist and why do you always look at it? Valari stared at the wristwatch. It's a clock. Rasmus pulled up his sleeve and showed the wristwatch made of iron, but he polished it to be shiny. It's a small clock and I call it a wristwatch. I use mana to run this thing, he explained. Everyone was intrigued by his wristwatch and wanted to see it up close. But Rasmus took the papers and left the classroom before they could ask him more about it. It was late at night and Rasmus was busy reading the assignments that his students had made. He was surprised that each of them used their unique approach to gain recognition from the people around them. Deep down he felt proud about this and he didn't realize he was smiling the whole time. These kids are bright. Rasmus chuckled, but then his smile disappeared as he put down the papers. Too bright for my taste as I had expected. These kids will make a better world together, he muttered as he looked at the stars through the window. Rasmus got up from his desk and went to bed since it was late. Rasmus stared at the massive painting on the wall above the stairs while holding a book. He was still young, and the book was almost as big as his torso. He looked at the woman, who wore a veil that covered her whole face. She wore a long white dress that only showed off her silky smooth long white hair. He wondered what his mother looked like because he had never seen her. I knew you would be here, young master, a maid hurriedly walked down the stairs. "Come, your father is waiting for you in his office." She reached out to Rasmus with her right hand. Rasmus walked into the long hallway where all the maids were busy cleaning the mansion he lived in. Every wall and space on the wall, they were filled with paintings of his faceless mother. People always told him that his mother was the most beautiful flower in Neva that could be called one of a kind. "Count, are you looking for me?" Rasmus looked at the handsome man sitting at his desk, busy with the documents in his hands and on the table. The man was Rasmus's father, Erglade Blackheart. A man with his long black hair and sharp eyes with silver pupils. He had his sleeves rolled up, showing off his battle scars on his arms. The proof of his achievement and loyalty to the Rafinus kingdom. Erglade stood up and approached Rasmus, who was only as tall as Erglade's knees. He went down to his knees and slowly removed his black gloves, showing the burned scars that looked hideous. "I'm a great man that the whole kingdom looks up to, but I'm nowhere near to being called a father." Erglade looked at Rasmus with his cold expression. "You have grown up and got taller than the last time I remembered. You must have begun to realize that something isn't right about me and your mother, but I can assure you that one day you'll understand," he explained as he put his left hand on Rasmus's head. Rasmus had no attachment toward his parents, which made him look so confused by what Erglade said. He never looked at Erglade as his father, he looked at Erglade as an admirable and respected family head of the Blackheart family. "Do you want to see your mother?" Erglade asked, still with his cold expression. Rasmus raised his eyebrows in disbelief that the day had finally come. He slowly nodded his head because he was wary of the offer. Erglade left his office with Rasmus following him from behind. He walked down the long hallway, and there were 2 doors in the center of the hallway. He walked past those doors, which made Rasmus confused because Rasmus thought his mother was in the room at the right door. Rasmus's confusion and curiosity turned into fear when Erglade brought him to the entrance to the dungeon. There were guards near the entrance, and they immediately lined up to bow their heads to Erglade. While Rasmus was in fear, he noticed all the knights were gathering around the training ground at night. It was unusual since he had always observed the training ground for years. He had never seen all the knights gathered and trained since the morning. Erglade and Rasmus walked into the dungeon. Rasmus was welcomed by the damp air with a weird smell that made him cover his nose. Erglade kept walking and didn't care about what Rasmus was going through. The dungeon became darker the deeper they went. Once they reached the end, there were 2 torches on the wall with a steel door in the middle. There were 3 knights guarding the door, and they immediately moved away from it. Erglade unlocked the door and slowly pushed it open. The door looked heavy because of the sound it made. The room was dark with no light, only the torches from outside the room that illuminated the entrance. Rasmus was a bit scared to walk into the room because he heard the rattling sound of chains. "Say hi to your mother." Erglade coldly stared at Rasmus. Rasmus was frozen still as he stared into the darkness. He saw a pale hand come out of the darkness, and when it was about to reach his face he woke up. His eyes fluttered open and realized it was a dream. That dream again. Rasmus muttered under his breath as he massaged his nose bridge. After he washed his face and took a bath, he took a stroll in the garden to enjoy the morning sun. He watched the students not wear the uniform since it was the weekend. They all left the academy and went to Gratland City to enjoy their free time. "Good morning, instructor." Monica greeted Rasmus when she saw him in the garden as well. "Good morning," Rasmus nodded. "Oh, I almost forgot. Do you have any plans for today?" He raised his brows. "No, I don't waste my time like other students." Monica shook her head as she watched the other students laughing and talking in groups as they all walked toward the entrance gate. "Perfect. Shall we discuss it now? About demonic beasts and why Aurelia can handle it while you can't?" Rasmus asked as he crossed his arms. "Let's talk about this matter in my dorm room." He looked at Monica with a serious expression. Monica stared at Rasmus for a moment before she agreed to follow him to his room. All the staff looked at Rasmus in disbelief as Monica followed him into the staff's dormitory. They were curious, but they respected Monica's status and didn't dare to do anything. "Would you prefer the door to be closed or open?" Rasmus asked as soon as Monica entered his room. "You want to talk privately, correct?" Monica asked back. Rasmus nodded and slowly closed the door and then escorted Monica to the table. "Where should we start?" Rasmus removed his suit and hung it on the chair he was going to sit on. "I believe the last time we talked, you said that Aurelia could fend off the demonic energy." He pointed out as he sat down. "Yes, compared to the previous saints, Aurelia holds a tremendous amount of divine power. They said her devotion and love toward their God is incomparable, which is the reason why." Monica nodded. "That's that, but why is it impossible to find a way to defeat demon beasts? Letting the public not know about any method to defeat them is baffling." Rasmus furrowed and stared at Monica. Monica took her time to think of an answer to that question. Because it's not their concern, and even if they knew how, they would have zero chance to win against them. The records are proof that only the Paladins and the Templars have successfully defeated and eradicated them. All the civilians and the other knights were killed during their attempt to subjugate demon beasts, Monica explained in detail. Even magic won't work on them? Rasmus raised his eyebrows. Demonic beasts are the result of them getting corrupted by demonic energy. As we have known, demonic energy originated from dragon's veins, which also means that magic is the accumulation of mana that originated from dragon's veins, Monica explained. With that being said, demonic beasts are immune to magic, but only to some extent. Powerful spells could kill them depending on how strong the demonic beasts are, she added. Rasmus realized there were still a lot of things that were hidden. If he wanted to take over Neva, he needed to know everything about it. He knew that he was nowhere near knowing the world he lived in. He needed to know about Paladins and Templars. He only knew that Paladins were knights who were blessed by the saints and received divine power. On the other hand, Templars were the elites among the elites that belonged to the Angelus and the Sancticus families. Their job was solely to eradicate demonic beasts to prevent them from growing in numbers. Their works and their achievements weren't known to the public. Another thing that made them different was the fact that their identities were hidden from the public as well. So the easiest way to defeat them is using divine power, which only the blessed knights or paladins and templars can have. Rasmus hummed as he rubbed his chin. Now that you said it that way, I'm getting more interested in finding a demonic beast, he smiled as he leaned his back against the chair. You're going to kill yourself if you think you can deal with it by yourself. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Monica said with a serious expression, giving a stern warning to Rasmus. Thank you for your concern. Rasmus stood up and walked toward the door. I don't want to take your resting time. We will discuss this matter with Aurelia in the next discussion. He opened the door for Monica. Monica stood up and left the room without saying a word. Rasmus roamed around the academy after his conversation with Monica. When he walked toward the training hall, he noticed someone was doing a lap. It was Maximilian. He observed from the door until Maximilian noticed his presence and stopped running. Instructor, Maximilian caught his breath as he wiped off the sweat on his forehead. Do you mind if I join you? Rasmus arched his brows as he removed his suit and unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of his shirt. Maximilian raised his brows, then he smirked as he nodded his head. He got excited when Rasmus wanted to join his training because he could see how big Rasmus's stamina and endurance were. It's a bit lonely training on my own, Maximilian said as he stood straight after he recovered his stamina. I hope you can keep up, instructor, he added with a smug smile written on his face. I doubt it, Rasmus chuckled softly as he rolled his sleeves. I'm ready whenever you are, brat, he said as he stood beside Maximilian. Maximilian began his lap again, and Rasmus followed him from behind. He immediately noticed how soundless Rasmus's steps were, that he couldn't hear anything at all. He knew a few people who could walk or run without making any noise. Those people were experts in stealth. How did you do that? Your steps don't make any noise. Maximilian looked over his shoulder at Rasmus. Rasmus smirked and was amazed that Maximilian could notice it immediately. Isn't your instructor amazing? Rasmus raised his brows. Maximilian scoffed, and then he fastened his pace to see how far Rasmus could follow him. 10 laps were fine for Rasmus, and he could follow Maximilian without breaking a sweat. Then, another 10 laps and he began to break a little sweat, but he never left Maximilian's shadow. On the 40th lap, Rasmus began to breathe heavily and slowly lost his pace while Maximilian was widening the gap. Rasmus stopped on the 50th lap because he knew his limit and didn't want to push his body too hard. He was amazed that Maximilian could still run and that his breathing was still steady. Not to mention that Maximilian had done a few laps before he joined in. So this is the body of a northern star, Rasmus shouted as he pulled his hair back and looked at Maximilian. Maximilian stopped running and started walking toward Rasmus. They trained me like I'm a warhorse, instructor. This is nothing, Maximilian explained with a smirk on his face. But I have to admit, you're not bad, instructor. You're above average compared to the warriors of the north, he pointed out as he stood in front of Rasmus. Is that title really important for northerners? Rasmus raised his brows, still catching his breath. Yes, it's like a life goal. But there are still 2 above a northern star, Maximilian nodded as he wiped off the sweat on his neck. There's a northern white star and then a northern black star. It's similar to mages for sage and great sage. The northern white star and northern black star are either experts in physical ability or magical ability. They're also on par with swordmasters of Neva, he explained. Who has reached the white star and black star? Rasmus asked. There are 3 white stars, my father, and the Wolfine family. For Black Star, there's only one, and that's one of the northern elders, my grandfather, Maximilian answered. So my path is still far away. Rasmus couldn't imagine how strong those people would be with those two titles. He heard about swordmasters, and there were only a few people who had given such a title in the whole Neva, except for Northern Neva because they had their own system and a title for it. Instructor, I believe you have an amazing physical body because of your late mother, Maximilian pointed out. Since your mother was basically Northerners, he added. Rasmus stopped his thought and slowly moved his gaze toward Maximilian's eye. You know about Orpheus? Rasmus asked, his expression changed into a serious one. Maximilian opened his mouth but stopped himself from answering the question. He suddenly felt anxious for some reason and thought of an answer. I apologize, instructor. I'm not allowed to speak such matter. Maximilian lowered his head, hiding his expression. Rasmus furrowed his eyes as he stared at Maximilian's sudden change of behavior. He wondered why both Lenin and Maximilian didn't want to tell him anything about the origin of his mother. His mother, Aristoria, had such an enigmatic aura around her, and he only met his mother once in his whole life. That's all right. Continue your training, Rasmus said as he walked past Maximilian and then left the training hall. Rasmus wandered the main building and there were only instructors and the other staff. Everyone stared at him with scornful looks and didn't bother to greet him. He didn't care about them and continued his walk until he looked at the library and found Isidore having a conversation with Valery and Alexander. Rasmus once again observed them and listened to their discussion. They were discussing issues that were happening in central Neva. They immersed themselves in the discussion until Valery noticed Rasmus was staring at and listening to them while leaning against the door frame. Everyone stopped talking and followed Valery's eyes. Instructor, good morning, Valery said quietly. Don't mind me, Rasmus smiled as he walked into the library. Everyone continued their discussion, while Rasmus grabbed a random book to waste time. He read the book while he listened to their conversation because it sounded interesting. It was about the mining site that was discovered on the border a while ago, the one that Edouard told him back then. Instructor, can we ask your opinion about this matter? Isidore looked at Rasmus, who sat on the furthest chair at the big long table. The mining site? Rasmus asked as he read the book in his hands. Yes. The Suevian Kingdom and the Erlen Empire. They both found the mining cave, but they both didn't want to share it because of the rich and rare minerals that were found inside the cave. Both wanted to monopolize it, Alexander answered. And that issue hasn't been solved? Even though it's easy to solve the problem, Rasmus asked as he flipped the page. The three of them furrowed their brows because they had been trying to find a solution to this issue. They tried to make sure there would be no war or conflict in their solution, but they found none. Use a third party to solve that issue, a powerful and neutral party at that, and doesn't belong to both factions as a mediator, Rasmus pointed out. Since we are talking about the central Neva continent, it's a lot easier because we have that powerful party since everyone believes and devotes to that party. The Holy Nation, the Angelus family. With that, the problem is solved. Both can share the mining site and share the profit with the Holy Nation, he explained. Using the Holy Nation, both parties can't do anything and are forced to share ownership of the mining site, he added as he closed the book and looked at them. Authority outmatched everything else, remember? He smiled. The three of them chuckled in disbelief because they never thought of that. The solution was simple, and yet they couldn't see it and wasted their time thinking of the complicated solution. Is there anything else you want to ask? Rasmus asked as he stood up. One day, you'll be the one who decides the future. You have to be able to make such a difficult decision. You need to understand that you will never be able to satisfy everyone, he said as he looked at them. Then what should we do? Isidore looked at Rasmus with a serious expression. Who knows, Rasmus smirked as he walked toward the bookshelf and put the book back in its place. Read a lot of books and you might find the answer yourself, he said as he walked toward the door. But again, the best teacher is experience, he added and then left the library. Rasmus looked at the sky as he walked back to his dorm room. Now the Wraiths should know my existence and location from the news. I wonder what are you going to do with that information, he muttered as he entered his room to take a bath. Rasmus looked at his wristwatch and he noticed that his lunch hadn't been delivered to his room. When he was about to get out of his room, someone knocked on the door. He thought it was Vidal who brought his lunch, but when he opened his door, he saw a familiar face that he hadn't seen since he came to Gratlin. Good afternoon, Instructor Blackheart. Do you care to have lunch with us? The man asked. Rasmus stared at the man's expression and hair that had a few gray hairs already. That man was the one who suggested Lenin consider Rasmus to teach at the academy. I'm sorry. I must have been rude, the man smiled with his eyes closed. Garrett Ernwind. It's nice to finally be able to meet you again, He offered his hand for a handshake. Rasmus Blackheart. Rasmus shook the man's hand firmly. You said us, which means there will be more people. He raised his brows.
There are 2 more people who will join us.
I can assure you that we mean no harm. We only want to have a conversation, to get to know each other a little bit more. Garrett smiled gently at Rasmus. Shall we? He slowly took a step back and pointed his left hand at the hallway. Rasmus grabbed his suit from the hanger and then walked out of his room. He followed Garrett, and since he was one of the executives at the Gratlin Academy, nobody avoided their eyes. It wasn't a good thing for Rasmus, since it seemed that he was getting more favor from the executives. Their jealousy and hatred could be seen in their eyes. They left the dormitory and went to the executives' dormitory, which was forbidden for anyone to enter. The building was the biggest compared to the other dormitories in the academy, even though there were only a dozen of rooms. When they entered the building, Rasmus was welcomed by a massive chandelier made of pure gold. There were paintings of all the current executives and the previous ones on the walls. He looked at the rug made of bear hides, couches made of high-quality leather, and decorations that were worth hundreds or even thousands of gold coins. I thought the staff's dormitory was amazing, but I didn't expect it would pale in comparison to this building, Rasmus said as he found the building to his liking. I know how you feel. I was like you back then, just an instructor, Garrett smiled as he guided Rasmus to the 3rd floor. Rasmus noticed how young Garrett was compared to the other executives. If he could make a guess, Garrett was in his late 30s, and compared to the other executives, he could be at least a decade younger than them. You climbed the ladder quite fast, Rasmus pointed out as he followed Garrett into the hallway. Garrett smirked without saying a word as he walked ahead of Rasmus. He then stopped right in front of the door and opened it for Rasmus. Come in, Garrett said as he walked into his room. Rasmus looked at the inside of Garrett's room, which was 3 times bigger than his. There were plants, partitions to separate a few rooms, and expensive plants in each corner. He then saw a woman in her late 40s and a man in his mid-40s, having a cup of tea with the amazing scenery of the island next to the window. Those 2 were the ones who didn't complain about me joining the academy. I knew they would be interested in me, but I wonder what they were after. Rasmus thought as he looked at both of them. I brought the man. Garrett smiled at his colleagues as he joined in and sat among them. Come join us, instructor. He looked at Rasmus as his butler prepared the tea for him and Rasmus. Rasmus walked in and sat among the executives, but he wasn't feeling nervous. He grabbed the cup of tea that the butler had given him, but he didn't drink it immediately. He looked at it and smelled it, making sure nothing was weird inside the tea. If we wanted you to die, we wouldn't use a cheap trick like that, instructor, the old woman said in a calm manner and took a sip of her tea. We have no intention to harm you in any way, she assured as she glanced at Rasmus. Rasmus raised his cup of tea and took a sip to taste the expensive tea. It was bitter and yet so smooth. He had never tasted a tea that good in his entire life and wondered what kind of tea it was. It seems you have good tasting buds, instructor, the old man smirked as he looked at Rasmus. So, instructor, I believe you have done your research about us the executives already. The old woman looked at Rasmus with a gentle gaze. Care to tell us what do you know about us? She smiled at him. The old woman's name was Esprella Blueman, and the old man's name was Ruben Orbeliani. Blueman family was a family of businessmen and women who had close relationships with the Ravenshroud family and the Ashenvale family, which made the Blueman respectable across Neva. The Orbeliani family was known to be the family of genius inventors, and they were the ones who invented blimps. They also had a close relationship with the Ravenshroud family and the Ashenvale family because of what they did. Both the Blueman and the Orbeliani were close to each other to the point they could monopolize the economy with the Ashenvale family. The Ernwind family, on the other hand, was the core family in the southern Neva because they were the ones who helped the Ardentis family end the Civil War and united the South Continent. The Ernwind family had countless connections with all nobles and royal families in the whole of Neva, including the north. That's all I know. Rasmus looked at the 3 of them after he told them what he knew about them. He could see the big smiles on their faces, amazed that he knew so much. So you connected the dots, didn't you? Esprella narrowed her eyes. Just now. Seeing how the 3 of you seem close, Rasmus answered and took another sip of his tea. I can assume that you invited me because you wanted something from me. As people who know how to make profits and satisfy their clients, I believe your intention is to make a profit, a long-term one, with me, he added as he looked at the 3 of them. The 3 of them went quiet and stayed still for a moment before they shared a look. They all chuckled as they shook their heads. They were amazed by how sharp Rasmus was. They didn't expect how sharp he was and how he could read them like an open book. Well, you're not wrong, but I think it's too early for that discussion since our lunch hasn't arrived yet, Garrett said as he leaned back and crossed his legs. He's right, that's why we should start with an appetizer. That thing on your wrist, what's that? Ruben pointed at Rasmus's wristwatch. Rasmus explained what it was and how it worked. The three of them could only blink their eyes because they didn't know what he was talking about. It was too complicated for them to understand how a wristwatch worked. You said you put a small amount of mana into that thing, and it worked? Why bother using your own mana when you can put a small mana stone into it? Ruben tilted his head, confused by Rasmus's method. Do I look wealthy to you? Rasmus raised his brows with a smirk on his face. Right, but for someone who was abandoned and exiled, you invented a lot of things, didn't you? That wristwatch and those attires of yours. Ruben looked at Rasmus's suit, shirt, and trousers. Are you interested in making a patent on that wristwatch and that clothing you wear? I can make you rich in the blink of an eye as long as you agree to have a partnership with us, the three of us, he added. As long as I'm the owner of my inventions, I'm interested. Rasmus smiled at Ruben.
Of course.
We are good at making our clients satisfied just like you said, Ruben smiled as he offered his hand for a handshake. Let's talk about the details during our lunch. Rasmus shook Ruben's hand and nodded in agreement. Rasmus negotiated with Ruben about the wristwatch and how much percentage he wanted for royalty. In the end, he got 35% of the prize that was going to be put in a single wristwatch. Since it was a complicated process and not everyone could make it as perfect as him, Ruben wanted to sell a single wristwatch for 50 eclairs. 10 eclairs is 500 gold coins, so I get 175 gold coins per wristwatch. Rasmus looked at Ruben as he enjoyed his steak. We can go for 15 to 30 eclairs per wristwatch depending on the quality and the model, Esprella said as she swirled her wineglass. I know nobles, and they would spend at least thousands of golds for that wristwatch, so you'll get more, she pointed out.
She's right.
We should limit the product to the point we have to use auctions to sell that thing, Garrett said as he pointed at Rasmus's wristwatch. I know people who have deep pockets for this kind of stuff, he added. Of course, not to mention that I'll rent your patent for a year. I'll rent your method for 3,000 eclairs, how's that? Ruben raised his brows. That's a reasonable price knowing you get more for selling it for a year. That's a deal, Rasmus nodded in agreement. You really know how to do business, Count. I can see myself doing more business with you in the future, Ruben said as he raised his wineglass.
Hold on, old friend.
Don't make this whole thing about yourself. Give us room to join, Esprella raised her wineglass. Garrett nodded in agreement and raised his wineglass. The four of them shared a toast. For the first time ever since he went into this world, he felt at home with these three people. They were greedy, a cunning and strategic kind of greedy because they knew how to control the rich, and it reminded him back when he monopolized the economy in his previous life. The four of them were discussing the profits already even though they hadn't started the business yet. It was because they were that confident and knew it would work no matter what, because wristwatches were a necessity, especially for social status among nobles. After they had their enjoyable lunch, they went back to the couch and enjoyed their wine. It's time for the main course, Instructor Blackheart. Garrett sat straight as he looked into Rasmus's eye. We want you to join us in this political game against the other executives. If you join us, we can make sure you climb that ladder faster than I did, he revealed.
Why me?
What's the reason? Rasmus looked at Garrett, then both Ruben and Esprella.
What else?
Chancellor Lenin personally scouted you and brought you here into the academy as an instructor. That has never happened in decades. And when she brings someone, she knows that person is worth the trouble, Esprella explained and took a sip of her wine. I have known her for 20 years, and the fact that you're here with us with your amazing talents both in business and teaching speaks volumes, she added. We want to get rid of both Julian and that stupid old man Arnoldi. With those two gone, and you have joined us at the table, Esprella and I can become vice-chancellors. That power alone is enough to make us the most powerful people in Neva, Ruben explained. Rasmus thought about it for a moment as he stared at the wineglass he was holding. The silence was supposed to pressure him, but he was calm and began to swirl his wineglass. It's a good offer, especially knowing these people are the people I'm looking for to help me with my plan. But I don't want to spend years in this place. It's a waste of time because the world is too big and there are still things that I need to understand. Rasmus thought as he looked at his reflection in the wine. That's a tempting offer, but I must decline, Rasmus said with a serious expression and looked at the three of them. They were shocked and confused when Rasmus declined their offer. They didn't expect that and wondered what was the reason behind it. You must be wondering, and the reason is because I'm not planning to stay here, Rasmus answered as he looked at them. I'm not interested in this place. I can achieve more outside this place, or even this island, he added. You do realize that this floating island is where all the power, wealth, and authority are. So what is it that you want when you don't need those three? Garrett narrowed his eyes, staring right into Rasmus's eye. Rasmus knew there was a foreign power lurking underneath the ground. the power which led to the Great Era, and the rebellion that his father did. Those things were connected, and it was as if they were preventing something from coming out of the ground. He wanted to tell that reason to those three, but he didn't because he didn't know if one of them was a part of that hidden power that tried to reach the surface and rule the world. He didn't trust them at all when it came to this matter, but there was someone he could trust, and that was Lenin. I have a priority, Rasmus answered as he stared into Garrett's eye. Trust me, what I'm planning to do, you don't want to be a part of it because it will affect your reputation, he warned. So you want revenge? Reuben raised his brows. It's not that simple, but you can say that I don't care about this world anymore because of what they had done to me. I want something else. Rasmus shook his head as he looked down at his wineglass. But don't get me wrong. I would love to maintain what we have here. I might be not interested in authority or power, but wealth, that's something else. He looked at the three of them and wanted to see their reaction. We understand, Garrett nodded. You're really something else. After all, it was Chancellor herself who brought you here. You have your own view of life and we respect that, he raised his wineglass. Of course. I know a good businessman when I see one, Esprella raised her wineglass. It'll be foolish of me to pass this one out, she smirked. Let's get fucking rich, huh? Reuben raised his wineglass. After Rasmus emptied his wine, he excused himself and left the room. In a dark room, a mysterious man was sitting in his chair when the butler came into the room and gave the newspaper to him. The man looked over his shoulder and saw the headline of Rasmus Blackheart's existence, and his title was A Wild Beast. How is that possible? The man asked as he grabbed the newspaper and read it. I sent a man to Hergel village, and Russell was right. Rasmus Blackheart used to live in the forest near the village. We couldn't find Russell and the others, and I think he killed them and buried their bodies or maybe burned them to ashes, the butler mentioned as he watched the mysterious man read the newspaper. The mysterious man sighed as he put the newspaper down after he read what happened in Gratland and how impactful it was for Rasmus because his existence had become well known. He didn't expect it would be this hard to find Rasmus, and after he found out where Rasmus was, it became problematic. I'm going to meet the people upstairs. I don't think this matter can be handled by us anymore, the man said as he walked toward the coat hanger. The people upstairs, boss? Do they have people in Gratland? The butler turned around to look at the mysterious man. They have, a lot of them, and I believe there's one at the Gratland Academy as well. We shouldn't be discussing this matter because the walls have ears, the man warned as he put on his coat. Let's focus on finding the remaining rats that are hiding. Don't let any of them escape or we will end up like Russell, he added as he adjusted his coat and then left the room. The butler bowed his head until he could no longer hear the mysterious man's footsteps. The bell rang and all the students went to their classrooms to begin the lecture. Rasmus walked in with the paperwork and saw his students staring at him eagerly since they wanted to know if their paperwork was to his liking. Rasmus put down the paper on his desk and then walked into the middle of the classroom. He crossed his arms and looked at each one of them with a smile on his face. Maximilian, your method of getting recognition is flawless. You don't put yourself above others, but you put yourself at the front for others. You also show a necessary compassion to those who follow you. You don't care who they are, as long as they are loyal to you, and that makes more people follow you and your cause. You're like the spearhead, Rasmus pointed out as he nodded in approval. Maximilian was in disbelief when he heard Rasmus compliment him. He never thought he would feel proud of himself from a simple compliment from an instructor. He was amazed that Rasmus could see him that way because it was exactly what he was thinking about when he wrote that assignment. Everyone looked at him and began to give him applause. Monica, your method of getting recognition is what the world needs. You help those who are suffering, becoming the beacon of their lives. You make yourself the root of the people around you, and you use them to gain more recognition. You're like a ficus tree, Rasmus pointed out as he nodded at Monica. Monica smiled as she nodded back at Rasmus. It was the first time everyone saw her smile, including Maximilian. They could tell how meaningful the compliment was to her. Alexander, your method of getting recognition is fascinating. You become a wise man who shows reality to those who don't want to see it. You use your wisdom to attract others and you use your understanding as your tool to gain their trust. It's as if I'm looking at myself in the mirror. Rasmus crossed his arms as he smirked at Alexander. It's because I used you as an example, instructor, but I used my own twist in that assignment, Alexander responded with a huge grin on his face. Brat, Rasmus scoffed. Everyone laughed at Alexander, but he didn't care because he believed in what he wrote. He believed that he could do things like Rasmus and become an unforgettable figure to those around him. It was the first time he had had his own desire to influence the people around him. Now you, Valerie. Your method of gaining recognition is really something else, isn't it? You use your knowledge to help people get rich by all means. You make yourself the pioneer, attracting all kinds of people, and I believe you're the first will achieve greatness compared to the others here. Rasmus looked at Valerie and approved of his method. Wow, so I guess we should be cautious around him in the future, huh? Alexander jokingly said. Everyone laughed and nodded in agreement. Rasmus walked toward Aurelia and stood right in front of her desk, staring down at her. The silence was deafening, and it made Aurelia swallow hard as she looked up at him. Aurelia, your method of gaining recognition is really beautiful. Your method is similar to Monica's, protecting the weak and offering your hands to those who are in need. But unlike Monica, you turn them into devoted followers who will be your shield as if you're their precious mother. Rather than indulging yourself in that feeling, you keep yourself focused on your goal, bringing in more people and making them feel your compassion. That's what a saint should be, Rasmus said as he approved of her method. Aurelia was speechless when Rasmus said that her method was beautiful. She was touched when he mentioned that she was like a mother figure to her followers, and that was exactly what she wanted herself to be. Tears threatened to fall, but she wiped them off immediately. So does that mean Monica is like a stationary light to attract people to come to her, while Aurelia is a moving light, giving light and warmth to the people on her path? Isidore looked at Rasmus. That's a good analogy, Rasmus nodded. Monica as Northern doesn't need to move as people will come to her. On the other hand, Aurelia has to move because she has the rest of Neva waiting for her, he explained. Rasmus walked toward Isidore's desk and then put his hands on the desk. His eyes were straight into Isidore's eyes. Isidore, your method is quite underwhelming compared to the others, and I have to say that I'm quite disappointed, Rasmus said with a serious expression. Isidore's heart felt like it was being squeezed so tightly when he heard that. He looked at the others, but none of them showed any reaction, as if they were judgingly staring at him without him knowing. What's wrong with my method, instructor? Isidore asked nervously. Your writings, they're all over the place as if you don't know what are you doing and where you want it to go, Rasmus answered, his eyes never leaving Isidore's as he leaned forward toward him. You're like walking aimlessly and hoping everything works to the point it's absurd, he added. Isidore was speechless and he felt ashamed by his writings. Not only did he feel ashamed, but he also felt inferior to others who seemed to have achieved something in life. He was angry at himself, his hands clenched so tightly to the point his nails were digging into his palm. Aurelia wanted to comfort him, but she knew that it would only belittle him. She decided not to and pretended that she didn't see anything. Meet me after class, Isidore, Rasmus said. Then pushed himself up and walked back to his desk, sitting on top of it. He crossed his arms as he stared at his students with a serious expression. What did I say to the three of you in the library? He asked Isidore, Valerie, and Alexander. We will never be able to satisfy everyone, the three of them answered. Aurelia, Monica, Maximilian, what do you think of that? Rasmus asked as he looked down at the floor. Aurelia, Monica, and Maximilian shared a look as they thought of the meaning behind that statement. Because everyone has different needs and goals that might not align with others, Monica answered. That's right, Rasmus nodded. With that being said, is it possible to be fair with anyone? He looked up to look at Monica. Yes, we can, because fairness doesn't have to meet everyone's expectations. Fair doesn't mean that everyone has to be pleased by the decision. It's about giving the same treatment to all parties whether they like it or not, Monica answered as she nodded. But do you believe such treatment can be called fair? Rasmus looked at Aurelia and Maximilian. No, I don't believe it's fair, because if all parties don't find any benefits from that, what's the point of being fair to begin with? Aurelia responded as she looked at Rasmus. I agree that fairness doesn't have to meet everyone's expectations or interests. Fairness is about getting both parties to understand why it's fair rather than forcing them to accept it without explanation, she explained. Rasmus nodded in agreement to Aurelia's words. That's correct. So what's the main thing that we learn from this discussion? Maximilian raised his hand as he looked at Rasmus. Rasmus glanced at him as he nodded, allowing him to speak. That everyone's reality isn't the same as ours. We have to understand their perspective and how to bring fairness to them before we decide what's fair, Maximilian answered. Rasmus smirked as he chuckled, making all the students look at him with their brows raised. Perfect answer, Maximilian. That's correct. Your reality is different from others, and your job is to understand their point of view about the world. Once you see some alignment between your reality with theirs, that's when you pull them to your side, Rasmus said with a huge smile on his face. But isn't pulling others to your side manipulative, even if it feels fair to them? Isidore looked at Rasmus with a confused look. What's wrong with being manipulative when it will bring a better future for humanity or everyone? Do you believe manipulation is a bad thing, Isidore? Rasmus raised his brows, His eyes locked into Isidore's eyes. Do you look at the world as white and black? Where good and evil are visibly separated like a wall on the field? He added. Isidore sat there, didn't know what to answer because within his heart, he believed it was wrong, but his logical mind thought it wasn't wrong. He wanted to speak his mind, but something held back his voice in his throat. If the world is that simple, there will be no more evil in this world, Isidore, Rasmus pointed out. You think it's wrong, but look around you. It proves my point that your reality isn't the same as others, he added. Isidore looked at the others, and it was as Rasmus said, none of them found manipulation wrong. At that moment he realized that he needed to find a middle ground between his ideology and what was necessary. After the class ended, Isidore stayed in the classroom with Rasmus. He was still in a dilemma since that discussion about manipulation. He wanted to hold on to his ideology, but he knew that wouldn't align with others, which would only raise conflicts in the future. Isidore, you're really holding that ideology tightly, don't you? Rasmus asked and could tell by Isidore's complex expression that he was struggling. Yes, instructor. It's what I believe, and if I don't hold on to what I believe, what's the point of moving forward when I have to lie to myself for the rest of my life? Isidore looked up at Rasmus, who was standing in front of his desk. Rasmus had a faint smile on his face as he dragged a chair to Isidore's desk. He sat across Isidore's desk and folded his hands on the desk, his eyes focused on Isidore's face. Who taught you that ideology? Rasmus asked, his voice calm and soft. Nobody. Isidore looked down at his own fingers. It's something that I read when I was still young, that all kinds of evil will only lead to destruction. Once you lie, you'll tend to lie even more in the future, creating a world based on lies, and that's when the world will crumble, he explained as he played with his fingers. So manipulation is an act of evil? Rasmus raised his brows. That's what I believe, because manipulation is a part of lying, Isidore answered as he nodded in agreement. Hiding the truth for their own benefits, he added. Then what about this? Rasmus rested his head on his fist, his eyes never leaving Isidore's eyes. You're in a situation where you can only save one person. One is a stranger that you don't know who they are, or your mother, the Empress. The killer will give you a choice to choose one. Who do you choose? He raised his brows. My mother, of course, but that's not manipulation, Isidore answered as he tilted his head, staring into Rasmus's gray-blue eyes. No, Isidore, that choice alone is manipulation. You are in control of the outcomes and you choose to save your mother because it benefits you the most, Rasmus pointed out as a smirk began to form on his lips. But that's different. It's not the same as deceiving someone, Isidore stared at Rasmus's eyes back and forth. He began to feel the turmoil within him, his gaze and words were like the last string that he was holding on to. All he asked for was validation for his answer and reasoning.
Is it?
By choosing your mother, you condemn the stranger to die. You're deciding their fate based on your own values and emotions. You have manipulated the situation to align with what serves you best, even if it's unconscious. That's the nature of manipulation. It's not always malicious, but it's always about control. Rasmus raised his brows as he leaned back and crossed his arms, cutting that last string that Isidore was holding onto. Isidore looked down as his fingers began to dig into his scalp and massage his head. He began to see it clearly that this whole time he wasn't just a fool, he was also naive. He never thought how immature of him and how he was blinded by his own ideology that he couldn't see the truth. Do you want to hear the truth, Isidore? Rasmus raised his brows, still sitting comfortably in the chair. Isidore slowly lifted his head to look at Rasmus. His expression was of a person who had lost their purpose. It's not about what's right or wrong, it's about what's necessary. I think you can understand that because your ancestor, he was one of the figures in the great era of Neva, Rasmus pointed out as he sat straight and began to shift the conversation. Did he do it because it was right? Or did he do it because it was necessary? He killed countless lives, burned countless towns, villages and cities. He arched his brows and leaned forward toward Isidore. Isidore was in his turmoil state, and hearing that from Rasmus made him lose control over his thoughts. He immediately thought about the Suncrown's past and how his ancestor was indeed killing innocent lives, and yet the Suncrown family became the most respected family. There's something that the world doesn't know. Isidore blurted out without thinking. So that means his action is justified? Rasmus tilted his head as he placed his arms on the Isidore's desk. Yes, the lives that he took, it was all for the greater good. Isidore nodded as he looked at the spot on his desk, his eyes were empty. He tried to protect the world from evil. He muttered. Do you believe he was evil or a hero? He killed countless lives in exchange for protecting this world. But again, how can it be so righteous even after everything he did to those innocent lives? Is the evil you mentioned earlier, was that threatening back then? Rasmus tilted his head, tapping his finger on the desk slowly, putting Isidore in a state of vulnerability and relaxation at the same time. When Isidore was about to answer the question, someone knocked on the door, snapping Isidore back to reality. It was Alexander, and he came in because he had forgotten his book that he was supposed to return to the library. I apologize for bothering you, instructor. Alexander looked at Rasmus's cold expression that was pointed at the wall. He then immediately left the classroom. Rasmus sighed as he slowly stood up and adjusted his suit. You seem to have understand how the world works now, Isidore, Rasmus said as he looked down at Isidore, his gaze a bit cold and menacing. I want you to redo your assignment and I want you to give it to me by tomorrow, he added as he walked toward his desk. Yes, instructor, Isidore nodded. And, instructor. He paused as he looked at Rasmus. Yes. Rasmus turned around to look at Isidore. Thank you for opening my eyes. I realized how spoiled and naive I was, and maybe still am. I'll try to become a better man, a man that my parents can be proud of, Isidore said as he clenched his fist, his eyes filled with determination. I'm not a man who believes in words, Isidore. I'm a man who sees a person through their experience and achievements. Rasmus smirked as he walked toward the door. If you want my recognition, to prove what you're capable of, he looked at Isidore before he left the classroom. Rasmus was a bit disappointed that he couldn't get enough information about what happened during the great era of Neva 400 years ago. But he knew there was indeed something that those figures were hiding, something evil that made them have to make such decisions as to wage wars against each other. I should visit Lenin on the weekend and ask her about this matter. She must know something about this, and I also want to know about the origin of my mother, Rasmus muttered to himself as he left the main building and went to his dorm.